now reconvenes this work session meeting of the Plano ISD Board of Trustees in open session at 6:08 p.m. on October 17, 2017 at the Plano ISD Administration Center. I'm Missy Bender, President of the Plano ISD Board of Trustees. We will conduct our meeting focusing on the district's two major goals: ensuring the continued improvement in student learning and ensuring the efficient use of resources. This evening, we have 3 agenda items that are for discussion and action. First one is relating to a memorandum of understanding with the Perot Museum to host first LEGO League events. Dr. Katrina Hasley, the Assistant Superintendent for Academic Services, will introduce the discussion regarding the Perot Museum hosting the first LEGO League events. Dr. Hasley.
We are excited to host the first LEGO League in our district and would ask that the board approve the memorandum of understanding with the Perot Museum as the partner on this.
So included with this item, there are 2 dates that this event would be hosted at Williams High School, December 9 and 16. So you have 2 contracts inside of your agenda. I'll entertain one item to approve both contracts. Do I have a motion to approve as presented?
I move.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, please raise your hand.
Discussion?
Oh, certainly. Any discussion?
Sorry. Just a short question. I know that I believe the Perot Museum is going to stipulate $1,400. Is that per event, per day for the 2 events? Or is it total? And do we have a budget impact?
I
know
believe
it's not
that's a
big.
total.
Total.
We do have an estimate budget. It's meals for the volunteers, volunteer t-shirts, custodial support, that kind of thing.
And do we have again, we're not talking big dollars, but do we have a budget impact? I mean, do we think it's gonna go beyond the 1,400?
We don't anticipate it would go
Okay.
beyond.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions, comments, discussion? All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, please raise your hand. Motion passes unanimously. All right, item number 2 is related to the Plano Regional Day School Program for the Deaf. This is a shared services agreement renewal. Dr. Hasley.
Yes, this is our shared service agreement for the Plano Regional Day School for the Deaf, which we host in our district, and this is something that we bring to the board every year for renewal.
Okay. Do I have a motion to approve as presented?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, please raise your hand. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Third item this evening is the 2018 graduation contract with the Ford Center at the Star. Carla Oliver, the Assistant Superintendent for Government, Community, and Planning Initiatives, will introduce this discussion for graduations at the Ford Center in Frisco on June 9. Ms. Oliver.
Thank you. Thank you. The contract is pretty self-explanatory. What I will say is we've been very eager to get the contract itself and to work through some details. Our community is very eager to learn the details of graduation, including the actual date. So if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them about the contract, but I think this will launch us into some much anticipated information to our community.
Okay. Do I have a motion to approve as presented?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
One question.
Yes, ma'am.
And I don't mean to put you on the spot. How does
I
this-
hope I have the answer.
I know, and if you don't, it's perfectly fine. I just
Okay.
wonder, how does this compare with what we paid for the convention center? Are we kind of apples to apples?
We were, with last year being the very first, we were prepared for it to be, I mean, there were so many question marks we honestly did not know. It really is not a great deal more expensive.
Okay.
So many of the things that we had to build at the convention center through vendors regarding sound and lights and the carpeting and the all of that kind of thing, that's not a part, now that's already built in. So I can tell you, we're looking again at this year's budget to see how we can crunch it down even further, but there was about a $40,000 difference, give or take. But again, all that has to be figured in if the convention center would be the preferred choice because of that amount of money. I think in some ways, I think we're getting more
I think so.
for our dollar at the Star than we were at the convention center, especially pending the kind of risks that we were taking.
Well,
With,
and the
you
Star
know-
has running water, let's just.
Thank you for saying that and not making me say that.
And I think anything that lets our families celebrate more fully, so it's an important occasion versus
Right.
saying only pick your 5 best relatives, I think this is something that's important to our community. I would ask, I understand that the parking was a little bit confusing because one hand didn't know what the other was doing last year in terms of another event that was on premises. Do we have learnings from that, and do we know who to speak to so it doesn't happen this year?
We do know who to speak to, but they won't guarantee that that's not going to happen again. What I will say is one of the things that made last year so special was one, that it went so well, but two, that, I mean, literally, I know I felt this way. I don't mean to project onto Brittany and the rest of our staff, but it almost felt like the paint was still drying while we were
Right.
putting kids through. And so that was their first couple of months of being open. So all that to say, I think they will come a lot further along with how they schedule and have learned some things as well,
Okay.
that they wouldn't likely do that again. We can't guarantee that because it's not ours, but they learned a lot and even told us that they learned a lot.
Okay.
So I think there were some shared experiences there, but it really was, I mean, I felt like we were gonna have construction dust on us, you know, from the event. But honestly, from a event standpoint, with all the things that might have happened, it really, from a planning standpoint, went beautifully. With just some hiccups that we wish might have been different, but otherwise, it wouldn't give me any pause for wanting to host there again, considering what our other options aren't or are.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, we have a motion and a second. We've had discussion. All in favor, please raise your hand. Motion passes unanimously. Graduation is set. All right, that concludes the 3 action items that were needed tonight. Now we move into the information-only section of the agenda. And first up is the Assessment and College Readiness Review. Dr. Dash Wersinger, our Senior Executive Director of Assessment, Research, and Program Evaluation, will present his report on 2017 accountability performance and information on college enrollment of our graduates. Dr. Wersinger.
President Bender, trustees, so this is kind of the first time that we are going through these college accountability results for 2017 kind of in depth. And so you've seen the copy, so there are kind of 3 parts to this. One part is going through the accountability results and sharing how we've done over the last 2 and 3 years, and going through some EOC results, because there's kind of twists and turns in how EOC results kind of get reported, and changes in standards. They're going to wrap up with information that we got recently for this fall enrollment of our college graduates, our high school graduates that went on to college. So this is, in fact, today, TEA formally released the TAPR reports. That's the final version of the accountability reports. It's still preliminary. It's publicly available, and we will be coming to board for action on that one in December, as the formal presentation and the public meeting that we have to do. So, it's kind of glad talking about accountability because this is the last year of this system. The 4 indexes is going away this school year. We'll have the 3 domains. We have House Bill 22 that redid all the accountability rules. We'll be talking to our, presenting that to our principals, what's proposed for Domain 1, Domain 2, and Domain 3 at the next principals meeting in November, at least what the TEA has said. So in some sense, all this will be very different this school year, in fact, for 2017-18 accountability. So overall, at the district level, Index 1, which is kind of pure passing rate, as we kind of used to know in the old AIS system, that was the only measure that was there, just passing rates. And that means that 85% says that 85% of our students met that passing standard. Now, the definitions of, if you try to look up TEANs, is what is passing, but there's nothing called passing. From 2012 to 2016, that standard was called Phase-in 1 standard, satisfactory standard. Then it became Phase-in 2 in 2016. Now this school year, it is called Approaching Grade Level Standard. TA redefined what the cut scores for the star. The higher standard is Master's Star. It used to be called Advanced. The second standard used to be called College Ready. Now it is called Grade Level, on grade level. And the third standard is what used to be called Satisfactory. Now it's called Approaching Grade Level. And if STAR survives until 6+ years, the state plan is that to move away from this approaching grade level standard to meet grade level standard, eventually sometime in 2022. I don't know whether I'll be doing the same thing in 2022. Index 2, it is growth, and the district target for that is 22, and the targets for elementary, middle, and high are different. So everybody says it's 42 out of 100. Well, yes, it is 42 out of 100, but there's a complex computation here. There are two measures of growth that is used. There's one called meeting expected growth, and there's another proportion, half the measure comes from exceeding growth. And that is a very, very tough task for any student or any school, so that 50% of this index comes from exceeding growth, and only a small proportion of our students meet that target. Like you had to gain, like you almost had to like jump a grade level in order to meet that standard, which is not really realistic. Index 3 is closing performance gaps. Yes.
Before you go to 3, so on 2 you said that there are different standards, different goals for the different levels. What are the goals for the different levels?
So if a student starts, it depends where the student starts.
Mm-hmm.
If the students already starts at meeting the highest standard, then just remaining in that highest standard, because of the ceiling effect of the star, it's a fixed form test, so there's a ceiling effect, you get the benefit of exceeding growth.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are if you are below that, if you grow a year's worth of growth on the STAR test, that is, if you are a student that is any standard below that advanced standard, if you get a year's worth of growth, the student gets the benefit of meeting the growth standard. If the student gets more than a year's worth of growth, then the student can qualify to get an exceeding growth standard.
Mm-hmm.
So this index, it is kind of sum of two. So it's a percentage of kids who met the year's worth of growth standard plus the percentage of kids who exceeded the growth standard. So half this index comes from exceeding, and that is only a small fraction of students in Plano, unless they already started out very, very high, get to kind of benefit from that growth standard.
Were you talking about elementary, middle, or,
And
I
high
think
school.
that was your question.
It applies to all 3 levels.
Okay, but are those different goals for the different
Oh,
types?
yes, it is different for every grade level and every subject.
Okay.
The standard is kind of computed differently. The third index is closing the performance gaps, and this is primarily for Plano. It is economically disadvantaged students, and in addition to that, it is the 2 lowest performing student groups from the prior year. So it is for Plano as a district, it is the African American and Hispanic student group plus economically disadvantaged. So most schools in Plano are measured in all those 3, is the average of those 3 student groups, economically disadvantaged, African American, and Hispanic. The campuses that are primarily homogeneous or only have like 2 ethnic groups, they are only evaluated on economically disadvantaged or economically disadvantaged and one additional student group. So it kind of differs slightly depending, because you had to qualify, you had to have a certain number of students last year and this year and so on. Index 4 is defined as post-secondary readiness. It is very different for K through elementary and middle compared to high schools. In elementary and middle, it is completely composed of STAR. 100% of this is STAR. For high schools, well, the same thing for 9, 10 campuses for Plano. For 11, 12, that's our senior highs and the academy. It is 25% of this measure is STAR, passing at the college readiness standard or the on-grade level standard. And 75% of this measure comes from graduation, type of graduation plan, and being college and career ready indicator, which a campus can earn, which a student can qualify by SAT, ACT, TSI, and performing on the STAR at a very EOC or at some high standard. So there are various ways of qualifying for that measure. So how did we do over the last 2 years? Now, we've had STAR since 2012. We had this kind of the same accountability system since 2013. When it was first launched with the STAR test, the index-based accountability system didn't have Index 2 because their Index 2 came on board in 2014. But they've been on kind of paper, it looks kind of the same accountability system, but behind in the details it is very different. For example, in 2015, until 2015, the special ed students had a modified assessment, which was kind of almost like a below grade level assessment that the students could take. Now that test, it was the modified STAR test, went away at the end of 2014. In 2015, there were two big changes happened. One is the special ed students had to take the regular assessment that every other kid takes with accommodations. And when they introduced that into the system, they excluded special ed testers from accountability in 2015. There was another big change that happened in 2015, that is they introduced the new math TEKS at the statewide. Because of that, many districts, not Plano, many districts requested that math be excluded from the accountability system too. So the state agreed and excluded math. Sometimes you had to be careful what you ask for. Had we had math in place, the math performance was better than reading, so it would have helped most school districts. So almost across the state. So those two assessments were excluded in 2015. So that's why, for example, a good real apples to apples comparison can only be made from 2016 to 2017. So this gives the index 1, 2, 3, and 4 results for Plano. So there are, we went through this at the last board meeting. I just put this for reference so that you can kind of get an idea of what we were talking about. And I had to cram in a lot of stuff in this one page here. I hope you can see it. I brought my powerful glasses. So this has Index 1, Index 2, Index 3 for all our 44 elementary schools. And let me kind of explain the sort order. There's a little orange bar. That is the percentage economically disadvantaged. So with the most economically disadvantaged campus being Mendenhall at 88%, going all the way to Wyatt. And the green bars represent the Index 1 score. The blue represents Index 2, which is growth, and purple represents Index 3, that is closing the achievement gaps. And if you don't see a blue or a purple, that means one is kind of behind the other. They are almost the same. Now there is obviously, as you would expect, there's a big correlation between, I think the correlation is about 60%, 0.6, between economically disadvantaged and the index 1 score. Where you don't see a very strong correlation is between the index 2, which is growth, because growth can happen at any passing standards. Though campuses that have a very large proportion of students who are performing very, very high at the highest standard, they kind of have a slight built-in bias in the growth calculation, and that's almost inevitable, you know, to have, you had to account growth, because those campuses, those students get that additional, just remaining at the same point, get the exceeding growth measure.
And I will make the same comment I made last year, that there's the general statistical correlation, but you can see here in some cases where you have a higher percentage or a lower percentage of low socioeconomic status, and yet lower performance as well. So I think that we should not get lost in the big picture. We should not lose the details of that picture, because there are things to learn from this.
Yeah.
From pairs of schools, you remember, like we talked about last
Exactly.
year.
I mean, that's one of the reasons I put
Yep.
both these were all kind of 4 variables are working: economically disadvantaged, index 1, index 2, and index 3. And growth plays a large part, you know,
Right.
because you had to use index 1 and index 2, which is growth. Kind of you had to always look at both aspects there.
So Dash, I love this chart. I like to roll around in the data. And so what I want to know is, what does it tell you as an experienced practitioner that we should be doing? What verbs are in this chart?
Well, we study the detail level of these reports. In fact, there's an underlying layer here which we don't see, is student groups, English language learners, special ed. So as part of our practice, we look at this kind of at maybe 2 parts to that question. One is maybe from the central office perspective. Now there are schools that are doing, in some sense, over exceeding compared to their circumstances. Then there may be some schools that are maybe can catch up to that level of campuses that are over exceeding. So that's the perspective from central office. Now, how we use this in practice is you really have to get down to, when we look at either growth, we have more detailed level reports. For example, when you look at growth, how we look at even at the district level and at each campus and grade level and subject level is, we are looking at bands of students. How did students who started off failing, how they grew? What compared to the district? Did they remain the same? Did they grow the kids at the same as all the other kids that started out at the same level? And especially when you look at growth, it doesn't matter whether the kid passes or fails. It's all about growth wherever the kid starts. So in our practice with schools and even at the district level, one of the tasks that we do is we have a benchmarks for growth for every band of students in the range of where they start. And then we kind of track whether campuses meet that expectation of meeting growth and exceeding growth. So we have some very detailed reports by subject, by grade level, with individual students listed in these, so that they can reflectively look back and see, why did it work with these? In fact, they can do it even at the teacher classroom level. So with this teacher, they got great growth with certain differentiated support with kids who are in a certain range. Now, how can we replicate that? Why did it not happen in another classroom? So that's part of our discussion that we do in staff. And in fact, we have a kind of a parallel process for that type of discussion, as well as using MAP, because there's almost a parallel report where we discuss MAP. And sometimes you don't want to put all the marbles in one test here, but if both MAP and STAR shows the same levels of positive growth or maybe lack of growth compared to the district, then that kind of double the evidence that there's good things happening or there's room for improvement.
I'm really excited that we've sort of unleashed your intellectual power on this, because I think there's a lot of learning, and I really hope to see as we start to assign resources this year that there's a correlation there, because I think that's been the missing link in the past. You can have all the data, you can have lots of plans that you could do. If we don't put people and money behind it, it's just empty, hollow. I look at how Sigler's actually kind of outperformed their low socioeconomic. Well, Sigler has the literacy program there. They have extra resources. I look at Jackson basically sort of outperforming based on their profile, but that's a bilingual campus, which means it's resources. So I have a question for Sarah. When do we actually start doing the resource allocation for the next school year? Because I hope I see some dramatic differentiation in that. You just can't ask the teacher in the classroom to do it and us not do it.
I would say we're not waiting until the next budget cycle. In fact, we had a conversation about this today. The campuses have had to, with Dash's campus improvement cycle, create their campus improvement plans. And then now they're at a point where those plans should be in place, so that we can request from the principals, what additional resources do you need now for this year's plan, not wait for next year's plan. And I think part of the resourcing for next year will come from the information we get from principals this year as well. So I think it's a two-part answer, some for now and then again in the budget cycle.
And I'm very hopeful, because I know we got to see the presentation last time on Meadows. I'm hopeful that people will ask for help. Asking for help is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. And so if someone's going to go in and do a very difficult thing and not need any help, they're either a superhuman person or they're not realistic, one of the two. So let's do what we need to do to resource these schools appropriately. One final question to ask. Do you ever look at differences by gender? I was reading some study where you just can't say African American kids or Hispanic kids, because there actually had been some fairly significant differences in this one school district on gender. So are you looking at female African Americans and male African Americans?
We do, especially on staff performance, we don't see large gaps
You don't see any
between
difference
male and female students at almost any grade level.
Okay.
I don't want, so it doesn't matter what subject.
Okay. Thank you.
Now, regarding resources, we've already collected from the 8 campuses. We already collected the resources for the ones that we are targeting. Our group 4, the tiered intervention, we've already started collecting their resource requirements from them already.
And
So we
I'll-
already have it, right?
So I guess one last editorial comment. We need to make sure that it's not just based on percentage of low socioeconomic, it's based on the absolute number of children in need, because it doesn't matter whether you're 20% or 40%. If you have 200 kids in need, you have 200 kids in need, and that's been a historic problem in this district.
So that's the 44 elementary schools. This is the 13 middle schools. Same concept, with the highest economically disadvantaged, which means Armstrong at 72, all the way to Rice. And this is kind of almost linear, but there are slight variations. Again, here the key point is sometimes there are certain index 1, maybe it's hard to move that, but growth is one area that we can definitely target for any level of student. And this one is index 1, 2, and 3 for all high schools and senior high schools. There are slight differences for academy being a 9-12 campus. So they have English 1, English 2, and algebra and biology. Very small proportion of algebra kids. Then the senior highs, their primary assessment here is US history, but there are also several hundred retesters included for our senior highs in almost all subjects.
So if you go back, this slide is actually where my previous question came from. I noticed that Plano Senior on index 2, the target, before when you showed the overall, you said that the target is 22, the target score is 22, they're at 20, and yet later in slide 27, you're going to say that 100% of our high schools passed or met. So is the score 20 here?
So for index 2,
Yep.
the targets are different.
Right.
And for elementary, it is 32. For middle schools, it is I better say the right number here. For middle schools, it is 30, and for high schools, it is 17, I believe.
Okay, so that was my previous
Yeah.
question. Okay, so this is why this 20 year
Yes.
is.
So,
still-
but, you know, when you kind of average those three, the district is 22.
Okay.
For index two, so. This graph, this is the 2-year growth on index two, and I will
It's different from what we have.
Yeah, I'm looking at something different.
Which one?
We have the
Oh.
3-year.
Yeah, let me make sure.
We have the 2015, 16, 17.
Okay. Let me get the right one, give me a few seconds.
Has 85% been our district passing rate for quite a few years? And are we going to push ourselves to move that up from 85% to something better?
Well, it was higher than that before 2012, when the standards changed. And Dash, I don't know where we were in 13 was the first year that the accountability counted with the new TEKS.
Yeah, 2013.
Yeah, and then of course, in 15, they excluded the special ed students, which had the effect of rising scores. So it's kind of hard to answer your question because we've never had a steady kind of target. Although Dash did, as you remember, apply accountability rules in 16 and 17 back to 15, because we did, our special ed students did take the test, and we had the results, the scale score results. It's just they were excluded. So those figures in 15 are apples to apples with 16 and 17, and that was, I believe, a little lower than, I think it was 82.
I'm just hoping as a district that we can commit to making sure that number goes up every year. I'm looking at, we're looking for charts, looking at the one that has the blue, the green, the purple, the 15, 16, and 17.
Right.
It looks like 17 dropped for almost all schools. So that shows a backward direction that I'm not comfortable with.
Wasn't there a difference in the number of questions asked though?
yeah.
Significant.
So there was a higher weight placed on the remaining questions. So, commonality, some commonality, I don't think it's total commonality between these 3 years.
Of course, I guess if we wanted to have an apple to apple, we could use our own MAP scores. That
Right.
might be something that would be quite interesting to see if we are moving in a positive direction or if we're losing ground.
Yeah, with the exception, with the caveat of what President Benner just described, 15 does at least have a balanced accountability rules. And supposedly, when they brought the number of items down, the idea was to maintain a level of rigor. Now, the psychometricians would say that's virtually impossible. Nobody knows exactly what that's going to do. But it was 82 in 14, 15.
I think a question that would be good to ask is, when you do say, you set across the board the 2017 scores go down a bit. How significant is the drop? When does it become significant? Because I'm looking at some of them and there's 1 point difference.
1 point. I mean, in the aggregate, it's, 1 point, there are various reasons that 1 point can be explained. The test became a lot shorter in 3 through 8, this for the very first time. And in some cases, we had 14 less items in the reading and 8 less items in math. And that, those changes do impact the passing rate. So in order to compensate for a test that went from 48 to 34 items, the cut score for passing, the raw score, had to be reduced by a proportionate number. So now 1 item is a lot more important, than when there were 14 more items. So the margin of error kind of get reduced. So let's see what's going to happen in 2018. I mean, this school year, whether if these numbers, because statewide you see there was hardly any change. And when you start out 10 points lower, there's a lot more room for improvement. And sometimes, most of our kids, there are a lot of kids that are right around those cut scores, they will be affected. So the statewide, 25% of the kids are far below the cut score. So I mean, there are some nuances most probably we will see for some consistent in this school year. I'm back on track. That matches with what you have. So these graphs, now I started off saying only apples to apples comparison is 2016 and 17. So but what we did, we did this last year, was we went back to 2015 and we recomputed all the STAR tests at the higher passing standard. So, and in these results, so we have 2015, 16, and 17, all 3 years under the same STAR passing rules and the same accountability rules. So we could do this for Plano, but we can't do this for anybody else or the state number to make it comparable. So this is for reference, and this is the other half of the elementaries, and this is middle schools, and this is and by the way, we only did this for K through 3 through 8, and I will explain the complications with high school when I after the high school numbers. So, and in summary, when you look at over 3 years, I mean, there is positive news because we are looking at the same exams, including math, including special ed students. Just remember, when the special ed kids went to the regular test with accommodations, in modified assessments, the passing rate was 70 to 80%. Special ed student passing rates on the modified assessment were 70 to 80% based on the test and the subject. I think the Plano average was something like 75. When they went to the regular STAR test with accommodations, the passing rates dropped to 20 to 32%. And that was no surprise. In the statewide, I think there was one test in one subject state, the passing rate was 17% for special ed students. And it's not an appropriate test for a lot of these special ed students, but that's the law. So, but at least we are playing with the same rules. So inclusion of special ed in 2015 really was a big difference. And we had to make some instructional changes because some of these students were enrolled in modified classes. So now the level of support and the level of rigor in this instruction, I mean, there'll be a learning curve because let's say a 6th grade special ed student, let's say 8th grade kid that had been modified instruction for a long time, now that was the curriculum for that kid. Now that pattern has to change when we had to prepare the students to do a lot more rigorous assessment. So I think the effect of special ed most probably will take multiple years for us to adjust.
So again, I wanted to make sure that we don't lose the details. Yes, if it's a drop of 1 point and overall you had a drop from 86 to 85, that's okay, but Wells and Foreman dropped 5 points, Weatherford dropped 6, Mendenhall dropped 7 points. I think if we pay attention to those, and by the way, at the same token, McCall gained 5 points. If we understand what's happening there, is it just the one time? Because, and I'm not even looking at 2015 because it was different. 2016 to 2017. If we miss a trend, I don't want to catch this 2-3 years down the road. If it's just something that, it happened 1 year and shouldn't happen again, and next year it should go back up, fine. But let's catch those things and not just look at the big picture.
I couldn't agree more, because these are children we're talking about. When you think that if we only have 85% passing on index 1, if you think that you can aggregate that across the district, I mean, it's 15% of our kids, or almost 8,000 children, didn't have academic success.
Mhm.
So if we were to actually have pictures of little kids versus just bar charts, we might feel, we might have a little more fervor to get this done more quickly.
So I agree with both of you on this, but let me ask Dash this question. If we're gonna have a whole new set of rules for next year, how are we going to be able to see these trends? If we're not gonna be able to have an apples to apples to apples comparison, if we just have 2 years that we can actually do apples to apples, how are we gonna be able to see these trends?
So, last year in December, they released the what if report on the A through F. They're gonna release a what if report this December too, based on the new accountability rules. In fact, that's required by law. And they will release that for every school in the state on the 3 domains. So we will have based on 2017, based on this data that we are talking about. So they will have a what if report on the 3 domains in December. I think it's going to the legislator on January 10th or something. So we will have a what if report for us to do a comparison when eventually the real one comes out with this year's data in July of
Well,
summer of 2018.
I would suggest that we also consider the MAP scores, because those are a constant in our district. And then from this discussion that we had last year, I recall McCall was one of our schools that
Right.
we had a blip.
They had dropped, yes.
Well, I'm looking at the number now, and we've seen
Up
a great
5.
improvement from 76 to 81. Can we capture and bottle what we did there? That's kind of what you're saying. What did we
Yeah,
do?
that's,
Put it
you
in a
learn-
bottle and transfer it to other
And
campuses.
it's-
I'll
Learn
be on-
not just from the drops, but learn from the
From the
bumps up.
gains too,
Right.
yeah.
McCall was wholly underperforming based on their number of low socioeconomic kids, so they shouldn't get credit for bringing it up. They were not performing based on the product they had to work with. And so it's hard to take them as an example of how to get growth in troubled schools when they were just troubled and they just needed to get it fixed.
But isn't this exactly the work that you're doing right now, Dash? With
Yeah,
your-
in fact, that's
your team
exactly
of
to give a little.
resources? You're putting together campus improvement plans based upon what's working and helping them introduce those ideas right now with the resources that, campus leaders are telling you they need. I mean, I think that's exactly what is happening.
Yeah, so McCall is a campus that we worked, that's one of our 12 campuses that we worked quite a bit with. They had about 30% of the students that we had to most probably dig in, understand them better, and see what the best practices. And we kind of did, we did that. So, and we saw a great positive gain for last school year. Now, we need to kind of most probably broaden that one out, because a lot of the other campuses have a lot more students that falls under that category. So there are several aspects. McCall was in the scheme of things, the level of degree of difficulty was manageable, and you could see outcomes in 1 year. But some of the other campuses, it will be a multi-year project, starting from even the lower grades. Remember, we are talking 3rd grades and up here. It has to kind of start at a lower grade.
Well, and of course, Dash, you can see we have had a little over the 2-year, 3-year perspective, the increase for the targeted schools a little more than the average. I would say one trend that I think you can say for this district, really for quite a few years, is that the gap between our students and their peers grows wider as our kids move through the system. So, and we have cut that even, for instance, last year, we can now begin cutting the state data as we have it. But looking at last year, for instance, when you took the 3rd and 4th grade scores last year, our economically disadvantaged versus economically disadvantaged in Texas, we were only 1 percentage point above their economically disadvantaged peers. And you'd say, well, if you're economically disadvantaged, you're economically disadvantaged for the 3rd and 4th grade. By the 6th and 7th grade, and those are the 2 tests in elementary and middle where you only take 1 shot. 5th grade, you get 2 or 3 whacks at it, right? 2, and 8th grade, same thing. By the 6th and 7th grade, we're 6 percentage points ahead for economically disadvantaged kids. And that trend carries on because by end of course, our gaps grow even bigger. So I would suggest that is one trend that I think has been here in Plano for quite some time, which is, I suppose, better than the reverse. It is how you finish. Now, it doesn't mean, Ms. Richards, trust me, that we don't want to continue to focus really intentionally, including pre-K and all the other things that we're trying to do, because if you start higher, you're going to accelerate higher. But at least it is a trend that we've seen for a lot of years, and we continue to see it.
And large proportion of that is English language learners. You know, you had to build them up, and sometimes it's the middle schools that see the benefit of that English language development from our ELL students, who almost a large proportion of them, that's at the beginning, about a third or even more than a third of our English language learners are Asian, about 2/3 Hispanic. So the ones that still remain ELL are mostly Hispanic students in 3rd, 4th, and they start exiting in 4th and 5th grade from the program, and you really see the benefit of that program only in the middle school grades. So so this is 2 years of Index 1, and I'm going to skip this one. This is kind of for reference. The numbers for the year before, for 2016, are right next to the school name, and the numbers for 2017 are in the top. But I want to get to talk about accountability, then I'll come to EOC scores for high school students. Now, distinctions is the other major part in the accountability system, and this is one of the very few components of the current accountability system that survived in House Bill 22. In fact, this was untouched. It seems the commissioner really loves this 40 comparison score methodology. So he wants more comparisons done with like schools in the new system. So there are 7 distinctions that a campus can earn. The district can earn the post-secondary distinction, and the way you calculate is very complex. But the bottom line is this: every campus has 40 similar schools based on these variables: campus size, percent ED, special ed, ELL, and the very last one, percent enrolled in early college. It really doesn't apply to us because our high schools do not get compared to early college high schools. This is kind of a fluid list of 40 schools, because very few of these schools repeat, about 10 sometimes of these schools change from year to year. And in order to get a distinction, you have to be in the top 10 in the performance out of these 40 schools. So you have to be in the top quartile of these 40 schools. So that's the kind of the requirement, and this is how our campuses did on distinctions. In elementary, out of the 44, more than 23 got at least 1 distinction. 10 of the middle schools got at least one. That's the very last column. And the other columns tells you which distinctions they received. And high schools, all high schools received a distinction, at least one. And the senior, all three received a distinction. And at the senior high level, there are a lot of indicators you had to meet in order to get a distinction. So that's AP participation, AP performance by student group, and so on. So when talking about high schools, reason I put EOC is because it is a lot easier to explain EOC than high school accountability. For example, in Algebra 1, in fact, I was getting confused myself, so I wrote this thing down. In Algebra 1, we know half our kids are taking it, slightly more than half in 8th grade, and we have a 100% passing rate, or maybe 100, maybe I think one kid had to retake it. And then the other half takes it in 9th grade. And in 2016 and 2017, the Algebra 1 standard was the same. Remember, when they increased the star passing standard, it was increased in 2016. And so this Algebra 1 is kind of apples to apples comparison. And you can see the gains in most schools. Now, the Plano East is the only senior high that is in that list. I was debating whether to keep it in or take it out, but because it's technically, now it's a 9-12 campus, I kept it in because there are a handful of IB kids that take it, but majority of those, remember there are only 18
Yeah,
testers
you gotta look
there.
at the number.
Yes,
Yeah.
so it's only 18 testers. So I put that as a reminder because sometimes for some of these indicators, we have two comprehensive high schools now, Academy and Plano East. The biology is also, it's a 9th grade test. Every kid takes it in 9th grade, and there are slight increases almost across the board. And this is comparing the same standard in 2016 to same standard in 2017. Okay.
So Dash, on all of these tests, there's not a whole lot of distinction year over year except for math. Or, I'm sorry, Algebra 1, and it looks like there are a number of really rather dramatic jumps. What's the, is there an explanation for that?
Well, I think we do very well. Maybe I should ask Lisa for that.
Well, that's, if that's the explanation, is that we're really kicking butt in Algebra 1, and that's great, I'd like to hear that.
So, and remember, this includes the non-honors track kids. So, for example, in this graph, this is Algebra 1. I excluded 8th grade 100% passing rate. This is 9th grade algebra only when you look at high school. So, and for the district number, that is just the 9-12 number. If I added in the, so it's apples, it's a comparison. So you can compare Clark performance to the district on this graph, because it's all kind of unfair to put 8th grades in there, because the honors track kids already took it and they passed at 100%. So even at the district, we got a large jump for kids who took algebra for the first time in 9th grade. So.
Dash biology, I thought biology had, half the kids had a different standard in biology.
Not in biology.
Non-biology, okay.
So the next slide is English 1, and for the very first, our English 1, they take it for the first time in 9th grade. So again, this is the same standard is applied for every kid in every school here. Now, Plano East, with the, remember most of the IB track kids, they take algebra in 8th grade because they've taken honors algebra. But English 1, they all take English 1 for the very first time as a 9th grader at Plano East. You can see the number, there were 168 kids who took that. English 2, again, kids take this for the very first time in 10th grade. So when they took it in 2016 to 2017, they took it under the same standard, the same higher standard that they have. So
One of these dash has different standards. I can't, you
Next
gotta
one.
tell me which one.
Next one.
No, one of the English ones does, I thought,
no, English 2, it's
is next year.
yeah. No, it's the same standard because it's under. Oh, I'm sorry. English 2.
Yeah.
You're right.
I think
English
I
2 have kids that took algebra in 2015 for the very first time, and half of those kids get a lower standard. So the honors track kid in algebra get a lower standard, and the non-honors track algebra kids who took it for the very first time in 9th grade got the highest standard.
I don't know if you followed that, but the irony is, the young people who had an advanced standard in math actually have a lower passing score for this test because they
When they
started earlier.
You lock in the passing standard the first
Yeah.
time you take an EOC. That's
Yeah,
the rule.
And because they took an EOC earlier, they have an easier standard, and then the other young people actually have a more difficult standard. Now, if that makes sense to you, I would worry, but that's the reality for this
But
test.
that's because they took Algebra 1 and
Correct.
locked them in at the
In
earlier
8th
time.
grade, yeah. So half these kids in English 2, they've locked in the 2015 standard. Now
So-
in US history, that's the assessment where all kids here have the same 2015 standard because
Yes.
they have already locked it in. Now, it's hard to talk about gains here because we are performing very, very high. And this will be the peak. I don't think it will go beyond 97% because we have, when you take into account the special ed students, they can remember, this is a test that they can retake. So special ed students can get an IEP waiver to pass this assessment based on the IEP. So overall, index 1, out of our 44 elementaries, 43 met index 1 score, and index 2 out of 44, 43 met it, and index 3 and 4, all our campuses met the cut score. In order to be considered improvement required, you had to meet index 3, you had to meet index 4, and you had to meet index 1 or 2. So the one campus did not meet the index 1 or index 2. So that's the campus we saw last week, last meeting.
If you go back to the comments you made just on that US history test, and you said special ed students, they can get an IEP to accommodate, take it again, that sort of thing. Don't we have a higher percentage of special ed students in our district than some other districts? Seems like we get dinged on the first report for that, exceeding the cap.
Yeah, our special ed rate is about 10%, and the statewide number is 8,
Okay.
right?
So
Yeah.
that has to factor in, even though, because we're consolidating all students in one test now. We used to have the modified, and you could identify the differences. I feel like there's almost a correlation that we need to be able to explain.
Well, even we may have had a slightly higher special ed proportion in Plano compared to the state, but the percentage of students that took the modified assessment is 3 to 4%. So that's a subset of the special ed students, and under most circumstances, they really need to take a modified assessment. And that proportion, that 3 to 4%, most probably will have a very difficult task of meeting the grade level standard on a regular assessment given to all students. So that's the kind of the peak. 96, 97 most probably is the highest that any of these bars can go because of that proportion of very cognitively disabled students that cannot approach the grade level standard. And this is
So the SPED figure does, I mean, it's the universe of all qualifying services, so it doesn't mean that they have cognitive challenges. It could be speech therapy or, I'm sure a host of other things too that don't correlate
To,
negatively to
Okay.
test-taking abilities necessarily. That's my interpretation, is that
yeah,
right?
that's right, yeah. The ones that most probably ADHD, HDHD, which most probably there will be, like, for example, special ed, but may not necessarily be impact the learning. This is kind of the fun part, because this is the one that most probably, I was trying to explain here, so we get kids at different levels of when they enter kindergarten, but the bottom line is how we exit them, right? So where did our kids go? Maybe in about a week, we are going to put all these reports out on our website, and it will have a lot more detail than what I'm going to talk today, but I'm going to put just the highlights. So our last year's graduating class, not 2017, 2016, the year before, the one that we tracked, we had 3,900 students in that cohort, and 77.5% of those students enrolled in a 2 or 4 year college. So, and this list here tells you where they enrolled. For example, Collin County, about 32% enrolled there, University of Texas, they're followed by UT, A&M, College Station, Arkansas. So, and the other columns gives the proportion for the academy, Plano Senior, East and West. Now, this is kind of the starting point, and we know, for example, these are the schools that National Student Clearinghouse which we contract with to track our graduates. We have 20 or more students are enrolled in these. The list is about 200 colleges long, but these 16 had 20 or more Plano graduates that enrolled.
So this is the enrollment that you have listed here. Is this the enrollment for this current school year?
So they graduated in 2016 spring,
Right. Yep.
and they enrolled for the very first time in 2016 fall.
Okay. But the numbers you have here are for 2017. It says enrollment as of August 2017.
Well, I put that as a reference because some colleges are late in reporting to the system.
Okay.
So sometimes there are delays in reporting. So this data is accurate as of what was reported for on August 18th.
So, just so that I understand, what you're saying is these percentages or numbers are the numbers of students that right after high school went into those colleges?
Yes.
So this is for last school year?
Yeah.
Not this current one?
Yeah.
Do you do something like that for, let's say, 2015 to see how many of them are now? Because I'm sure that there are a few that would just take 1 year off and
Yeah, in
still
fact,
be on.
yes, we do. And maybe you might
That's coming
see a
up.
slide. It's coming up, and if you want a more detailed number layout, we can also provide that for other graduating classes.
Okay.
So,
So Dash, do we ever take this, just looking at some of the numbers here, and look in terms of college recruiting at particular campuses? Because I noticed, for example, Oklahoma is proportionately heavier representation at Plano West than the other two campuses. So is that because they recruit West, or is it do we ever do any kind of deep dive into that?
well, most 4-year colleges, it's obviously that it's more competitive. So since Plano West has a slight little bit, their bell curve of performance is slightly shifted. Most probably they would have a higher proportion going to 4-year colleges. And in fact, I think if you, for example, take UT, the third line, 9.8% of Plano West kids went to UT. So we may think that the rule is what, 7%, right? But some of these kids are very high performers. because UT has about 15% of their kids, they have leeway to hire outside that 7%. So we know that additional kids from Plano West. Now, for example, Plano East, that number is 4.7, Plano Senior is 6, and the Academy, well.
So your takeaway is simply that there may be a bigger pool at
Of
west
candidates.
of college-bound
That
kids.
meets their
Yeah.
entry requirements.
Okay.
But the other figures, like the Plano Senior and the Plano East figures for UT in this example,
Mhm.
that doesn't necessarily mean that those students are in that portion of the grade distribution. It just means that percentage of students went.
Right, yeah.
They could also be qualified, but sit outside of that cut point.
That's correct, yeah.
They
So,
have
I
to
mean-
be, they have to be because those numbers are less than 7%.
Yeah. No, so for example, we know who these kids are, so we partner with counseling to kind of to track who really goes to these colleges, because remember, GPA is only one portion. There are athletic scholarships, there are other opportunities to go to some of these competitive, like quota-based colleges. So, but Plano West is a good example where they exceed the 7%.
Dash, I was really puzzled to see the large number of academy children going to Collin College, because if you think there's any correlation between financial need, they have one of the lowest percentages of low socioeconomic kids at the academy, but they send 40% of their kids to Collin College, so.
Yeah, so this is the first enrollment, so this is, let me, ask me the same question after the next slide.
It doesn't mean that they're not going to go to
Go
another
to
college
four-year
after 2
college.
years.
Most do.
But why do more of them pick that pathway than at the other high schools?
It might be
Because it's
related
more
to
than
dual credit or
$36,000
something.
difference.
Like a lot of the other kids at some of the other comprehensive schools got more hours, like calculus. Maybe they wanted to take calculus in the summer and get that over with before they go in the fall. I'm just
A lot of variance.
projecting here what I hear some kids talk about doing.
So, I think that question came up last time I spoke about Collin County. So this is a track of where, when the kids enrolled in Collin County, where they went afterwards. So, and a good cohort to look at this is 2013. Okay, because 2013, they could finish 2 years of Collin, and then we can track where they went for their third and fourth year. So out of that 1,056 that enrolled in Collin County in 2013 from Plano, it tells you 118 went to UT Dallas, 72 went to North Texas, and so on. So 34% of these kids, out of these 1,000 kids, we have tracked them to a four-year college in their second, third, or fourth year from that cohort. So about a third of those kids moved on to a four-year college.
Right, but that's probably across the board, so it's still sort of a strange thing that more kids from the academy choose to go to Collin College than their peers at the other high school. I wouldn't spend any time on this, I wanna work on those elementary
Yeah.
kids, but it's sort of an interesting thing. It can't be about income, because that's the riches of our high schools.
No, but it could be about proximity, because if you look at the top 3 schools in 2013 that they went from Collin College, they're within 30 miles of Plano.
Right.
So that could very well be proximity cost, living at home, to cut cost. I mean, I think to your point, there's lots of variables as to why these kids would go through Collin College first.
But why are more of them at the academy high school than at our other comprehensive high schools? Just sort of a puzzlement.
That's why I said, this is one of my favorite topics. I can study this forever. Because there are so many open-ended questions.
Senior and East.
So, how did we do in kind of longitudinally over?
Before you move on the previous slide, that I'm still trying to understand what is it exactly that we're seeing here.
Okay.
I'm looking at 2015, for example. Number of students that went to Collin College was 949, and then below that are students that graduated in 2015 and colleges they went to after.
No, they don't have to graduate. So out of that 949 that went to Collin
Right.
college.
Mhm.
We know 29 moved on to UT Dallas.
Okay.
14 went to UNT, 4 went to TWU.
Right.
And so that's what it says.
But if you add up all those numbers, this doesn't come anywhere near 949. Where are the others?
Oh, there's a list of, there are 100 different colleges they went to after calling. I only gave like the top 23 or something.
Well, but if it's ranked based on total number, and down at the bottom you have the 1-2s.
There are a lot of ones and ones. So out of the
Even if it's 100 after that, it's going to be another 100 students.
so out of the 1,056
Yeah.
in 2013,
13, yeah.
34% of those kids were tracked to a 4-year college.
And 66%
Were not
did
tracked.
not.
Yeah.
Okay, that's my
But
question.
we're gonna also learn later on in that same 13, another third are gone, they leave for whatever reason. So
Well,
there,
it
there's a
could-
third that are not continuing their
That's good.
higher education,
It could
at
be
least
that-
that's what.
Yeah, that they just wanted an associate's degree and they went into the career of their choice,
Or
perhaps.
military.
Sorry?
Military.
Or military, right?
Of course, one way I think we could best help our kids is if they are going to Collin College and they are going to UNT or UTD, to look once again at our dual credit offerings, or how can we get this first year done? Now, what math courses do we have to have? And that will differ based on their major, STEM, business, education, liberal arts, and what science. We do fine with the English, history, and government, but those other two areas, we're not giving children options that let them go to Collin College with more credit and then matriculate on to UTD and UNT.
Or TW.
But that's not the number one, that's not
No.
the high numbers on
It's the
here.
third
Same thing
one.
with A&M. It's very hard to transfer into A&M business, engineering, they have very low acceptance rates. So if we want to help the kids in a practical sense, it's give them credits that they can take within to UNT and UTD.
And we have a dual credit update coming for you
Yeah.
very soon.
I mean, remember this, we did this only, not only for Colin. For example, out of the 68 kids that went to, I'm talking about the 2013 cohort because because they had 3 years to make a transfer to a 4-year college. Out of the 68 kids, half of them went to a 4-year college. And most likely, a lot of them went on provisional admission to A&M. Austin Community College, the 20 kids that went there, 40% went to a 4-year college. The other 2 campuses that were on the list is Richland College, that's in Dallas, 25% of those, so out of that 12, 3 kids moved to a 4-year college. And Brookhaven was the other large number, that is 10 kids. Out of that 10, 1 went to a 4-year college. So that list, Colin, Blaine, Austin Community College, Richland, and Brookhaven accounts for like most of our kids that went to a 2-year college. All the others, like, it's less than 10 kids that went to those.
Mhm.
Longitudinally, for example, there's immediate enrollment after fall, so that's kind of averaging 77 for all the 8 classes that are represented here. This is where they went, public versus, let me put that number in perspective. For example, on the previous slide, nationally, that number is 69.2. In Texas, that number is 51. Okay, this is 2 or 4-year college. The proportion that went to a private school versus public, that's pretty consistent in the last 8 cohorts. Private is the orange line and the public is the green line. Then this is kind of when we were talking about, this is 2-year versus 4-year. So what proportion went to a 2-year college and 4-year? You already saw that number, mostly going to Colin, about a third. In Texas, for example, 41% of the Texas graduates go to a 2-year college. So in Texas, 51% go to a 2 or 4-year college, 41% is to a 2-year college, and the remaining 10% is to a 4-year college. Nationally, out of the 69% that went to a college, 25% goes to a 2-year college, and 44% goes to a 4-year college. So,
Dash, in years past, I thought we had a data point that was 2-year, 4-year technical school, some kind of post-secondary experience of some definition beyond high school, whose figure was higher than this figure. To your knowledge, have we tracked something
yes,
that
so
way?
this is immediately fall. So on slide 35 is the number most probably you are referring to, which is the 85% number, which is within 2 years of graduating.
Okay,
Yeah,
it's,
that's what it was.
yeah, the number that I was thinking at was actually a few points higher than that, but that helps. That
There,
gets me
well, there is a
closer.
small difference.
within a few years.
For example, when our counseling department tracks where
Yeah.
the final transcript went, I believe that number is, was it 91%?
That's the number I'm thinking of.
When you track where the final transcripts went, that number, it was 91% last year.
Okay.
So
That-
there's a certain fraction of the kids that National Student Clearinghouse cannot track, so that might account for
Schools
that
have
3%.
to opt into National Clearinghouse, and so sometimes kids attend schools that are not part of the clearinghouse, and they won't be showing. up
Right,
there.
so that's very important, because the number that I'm familiar with is that 90-something number.
Yeah.
So I was a little concerned when I saw a 70-something number, going, what's the difference here?
Yeah,
Thank
so.
you. Thank you
the
for asking.
Yeah, so immediate fall is 77, but within 2 years, this is the number that comes, they stop tracking first time, they don't, this is a number that National Center for Educational Statistics maintains that kind of requires, so they put some limitations. You only track college enrollment, they track it forever, but kind of the benchmark is within 2 years of graduating.
So when, we're having another report in December, I think.
Yes.
Right? So could you, I'm sure you're probably going to include that data point, because I just need to reconcile these two, because that one seems to me to probably be more inclusive of actual experience, because it's based on the transcript delivery. And this data source here is a good subset of that, not
Yeah.
all.
Dash,
So-
is there a way to track how many of our kids leave and go, for example, directly into the military? Because if we're looking at a percentage, you know, I want our percentages to add up to 100, that either,
Yeah.
91 are in college within 2 years, what's the other 9% doing? If I know 5% are in the military or 3%, then that gives me
Now,
something to.
now, we do track that now, because that's part of the state requirement. Because that will be an indicator, a number of students who enroll in the military will be an indicator in the new system.
It's in the new accountability system.
New
So
accountability
we will
system.
be able to include that 2
Yeah.
years from now.
Yes, in fact, it will be included, we tracked it for last year too, so it will be included in this year's accountability system.
Okay.
So,
I mean, if the, the goal is to kind of be able to figure out where, if we are servicing 100% of our kids for postgraduate, readiness, whether that's college, whether that's military, there's gonna be a component that go into a career, just go straight to work. If we could kind of break those down so that we get a better idea as to what the 9% or the 13% that aren't reflected here, what they're doing, that would, I think, be beneficial to me.
and another number that we are required to track is, it's our students who are earning a true certification where they can go straight to the workforce. So there are 2 additional numbers we are tracking is going into the military and going straight to the workforce with a certification.
How are you going to get those numbers? Self-reported by the children?
They're self-reported, and there's a minimal level of documentation requirement to track it.
And the state defines certain certifications as ones that they believe are like walk out into an entry-level job. And those are the ones that will be part of the accountability system.
There are 71 certifications in that list, and one of the requirements is that you can immediately get a job with those, one of those 71.
And the good news is we had 1,600, I think, industry certifications 2 years ago, and last year it went up to 2,600. So we kind of ahead of the game started really getting more. Now, not all of those certifications are in those 71. So we have to focus on really making sure that our kids have opportunity in the 71. And sometimes that's helping pay for the test.
So to wrap it up, let me go to that last page on your slide, that's page 37. So one of the benchmarks that they've set is graduation within 6 years after enrolling in college. So for our class of 2011, so they've already finished 6 years of college now. So on that very first year, so we know that 81% enrolled in college either the following fall or following spring. And that purple area are the students that were not tracked to be in college. So this is like a yearly snapshot of what happened to our class of 2011, all the kids that graduated. The very last one, 16-17 school year, 55.3% graduated with a 2 or 4 year degree from that class within 6 years. And so for example, to compare the national rate, comparable rate to that 55.3 is 37.4%. So almost close to 18% higher, almost of our kids get a 2 or 4 year degree after 6 years of graduating.
And the Texas rate?
The Texas rate, the Texas rate I found was for 2008, and I kept it out because it was not comparable.
Okay.
Because the Texas has a different way of tracking it. They only track for within Texas, so they don't account for the kids that went out of Texas. So it's kind of a hard number to find.
Isn't there a Texas goal to reach 60%?
60, that's the governor's goal.
So it's less than that.
60-30 is there.
So, yeah, so it's less than that right
It's
now.
a way lot less than
Yeah.
that.
I like
And in
30,
fact,
60.
that 60 that the governor puts out there, that's not only, that's industry certification,
Not just
2-year,
military,
4-year,
yeah.
so, you know, we're hitting close to that in just 4 years.
So the number that the 60% is by 2030, out of the 18 to 34-year-olds, 60% would have earned a college degree, 2 or 4 year in the military, or is in the workforce. So that's the standard for 60.
Can I ask a question? Is there a way to track the students that graduate early, before 4 years are up?
Yes, we have that information too.
Okay, because a lot of them come to school with AP credits and graduate early. And then let me ask this, is the purple area, is that where the private school students are?
Well, lot of the larger private schools are in the system.
Okay.
But then there are some religious colleges that are not in the system, and I'm pretty sure that will account for
That would be where
quite a
those are.
portion of
Some
it.
of the
And
trade schools too
Yeah.
that participate in this, so, you know, there might be some culinary schools and smaller vocational type colleges that don't necessarily participate in this, so.
Does this just represent those students that initially were in this system and then after 6 years either had a degree or did not? Okay,
And these are graduates.
yeah.
the Plano graduates, which, I mean, with our 98% graduation rate, so this is pretty much everybody in that senior class. So,
I've got my fingers crossed that 6 years is enough time for my kid to be in the green.
Well, there are still some plugging away, I mean, there are.
okay.
Right, thank you, Dash. All right, we have 2 more reports. The next one is on social, emotional health and learning update. It is for information only. Susan Modisette, the Assistant Superintendent for Campus Services, will introduce this report on the progress of the Social Emotional Learning Committee work from 2016-17.
Thank you, President Bender. I'm inviting Mark Allen to come to the podium, and Mark is joined tonight by several of our members of our social emotional learning committee. Shannon Axman, who is the Mendenhall social emotional teacher leader, is with us. Margot Spence, who is the counselor from Vines High School, and Julianne Dean, who is the principal at Haggard Middle School. Thank you.
Thank you, President Bender and members of the board. Thank you for this opportunity to update you on our work with social emotional learning. I wanted to start off just talking about what led us up to this work and forming this committee originally around social emotional learning. So it really was a culmination or a combination of different factors that really kind of coalesced kind of around the same time. You know, we were trying to work with our campuses to try to help build communities and sense of belonging for all students with a diverse population. Looking at meeting students' needs that had experienced trauma or poverty as well. Our counselors were reporting an increase in student stress and self-harm. We have some overrepresentation of some of our minority students in our discipline data, as well as looking for a way to integrate the work we've been doing in our counseling and guidance programs, and how do you lift that out into the classroom in a more meaningful way so that it carries that forward. So those were kind of the unmet needs we were looking at. On the other end, at that same time, several people from the district had been going to see the work at the Momentous Institute in Oak Cliff and seeing some of their promising practices that they were experiencing and working with their population in social emotional learning and the impact that was having on them, as well as several had gone to some of their conferences, their Changing the Odds conference as well, to kind of hear with that. And of course, at the same time, there was really an increase in the academic literature associated with the benefits of social emotional learning and how that could impact academic and behavior in school. So all of those factors led up to a meeting that between academic services, campus services, and student and family services to kind of say, what do we do with all this information and moving that forward. And out of that group was the development of building a larger group to focus and study this in a more intense and intentional way, which was the Social Emotional Learning Committee. There were about, and there's the list, it was made up of teachers and counselors, both campus administrators, district administrators from various departments and groups. It ended up being about 50 members, so it was a pretty large group that spent about 15 months studying this and coming up with recommendations and findings for this. So this was our calendar of work when we began. We started, our first initial meeting was on April 5th on 2016, and we worked up through June of this year. Our initial goal was really to just develop a learning community to really study this and gain some expertise in this so that we could really have a sound understanding of how could that be moved forward and would there be benefits in learning to that. So this group started by really exploring what is social emotional learning in an in-depth way, looking at experts in the field, seeking out leading edge groups like CASEL, which is the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, which is one of the big leaders in this movement. With that, we were able to glean some work that several districts had done across the country, because they have a collaborating initiative that they're working with several large urban districts on this, Anchorage, Alaska being one, Austin ISD being another, Oakland Unified Public Schools being another. So we looked at some of the work they were doing as well. So after we got really delved into that, we started building a definition and a vision of what that needed to look like, looked at some core values, brought in some students to hear from them at this point. Then we broke into some work groups to do some more intense work around looking at standards, learning standards associated with social emotional learning. What does it look like to have a social emotional healthy classroom? school, what does it look like for a healthy school? What are good social emotional instructional practices associated with that? And then some resources and what does professional learning need to look like that? So the work groups finished their work and presented that to the larger committee on April 4th, and then the committee came back for their final recommendations on June 19th. So I'm not going to read all of these findings to you, but there's a couple that I wanted to lift out in here. One being that the research on the impact in academic growth, there was a meta-analysis done on about 213 different programs where they showed on average an 11% gain in academic skills when social emotional learning was taught intentionally. It also impacted behavior in the classroom, in the school, as well as overall sense of engagement for students in those schools. The second piece is that one of the findings is that we really, and this will be connected to some of the other findings on the next slide, that the curriculum is best delivered through instructional practice that naturally promotes social and emotional health. And as you learn more, as we look more in depth on that, you'll see how those are very connected in terms of those skills. So on this group, it was important for the committee to really say this needs to be a holistic and systemic approach, and not just something that happens with the counselor or not just something that happens over here, but it really has to be, it can't solely be taught in isolation, but it does have to be embedded in what we do in the classroom. So in connected to that curriculum piece is really in our learning, the connection between cognition and emotion and how interrelated those are in terms of the brain research was very evident in that, and that you really can't have one without the other, as well as the social benefits of learning. That learning does occur in a social construct as well, and to really fully benefit from that social construct, you have to build those social emotional skills in our students to fully be impacted by that. So there was a few, I'm going to highlight a few recommendations from the group. One was really that we needed to come up with a common language and understanding, because when you say the word social emotional learning, that means different things to different people. And so really having a common way of talking about that in Plano was very important to that. So there was a definition or a vision that was developed by the group, as well as some core values that we'll talk about in just a minute. And also that we felt like a good framework for implementing this would be to utilize the 5 emotional core competencies that Castle had developed around that. In addition, that it was important to adopt learning standards associated with this to give it some structure as it's implemented. And then it was strongly felt that we needed to continue the collaborative approach to this, and so that it would be important to have a steering committee of various groups and departments and schools to make sure that this is a coordinated effort and it didn't become isolated amongst the groups. So the team spent a long time really, as we studied it, really trying to define what did we mean by social emotional learning, and as you can imagine, a group of 50 people wordsmithing a document is a very fun thing. So, but what we came up with is these very intentional words that we use, which is social emotional learning is an educational process through which skills for life effectiveness are intentionally taught and modeled in a safe, supportive, and culturally responsive environment. In Plano ISD, we will grow to understand and manage emotions, care for self and others, develop empathy, build resiliency, and solve problems effectively and ethically. It was very important for that part that we used the word we and that we didn't say students, because the adults were also a part of this piece as well. Finally, social emotional learning will empower students to become responsible, productive, and contributing members of the global community. So that is really the what we mean by social emotional learning here in Plano. We didn't just adopt what somebody else said. We looked at what everybody said. We looked at the research behind it, and this is what we felt best articulated the thinking of the group around social emotional learning. Equally important to that, we really said we really need to understand what is most supportive of this. And so with the definition, that's really the what. But these core values are really the things that we believe need to be in place for the how you make this happen in a school. And so this, and looking the group really said, we believe in the power of compassion, relationships, and hope. Hope not as an abstract concept, but as a skill that can be grown and developed in students. Community, whether that's really about building a sense of belonging and helping students feel they're part of a greater situation, whether that's in the classroom, whether that's in the school, whether that's outside the school, in the greater community. Diversity, meaning that we're going to be honoring and building on the strengths that each student comes and their background comes in terms of as we come to the learning. And then with trust, trust is really the foundation of it all. Without trust, we're not going to accomplish any of those things.
So out of curiosity, why not empathy here?
So compassion is, we would define compassion as empathy plus action. So it's really contained in compassion.
I would look at empathy as, to me, that's one of the key skills. It's my ability to understand you
Right.
and communicate with you. It's not necessarily compassion. It's beyond.
Well, I mean, that's really, and that's why it's in the previous slide, in
Right.
terms of where we talk about building empathy. But in our study of that, because that was a big conversation in the group. Should we use empathy? Should we use compassion? And in looking at that, it was more than just understanding who you are and what you think, but what are you going to do about that?
Right.
It's okay to understand, that you're hurting in such a way, but how are you as a person going to respond to that and take action upon that in terms of empathy? So it needed to go beyond just understanding how they're feeling and what they're about in terms of what we want to do as we move forward. So the five CASEL areas and core competencies are around self-awareness, which is really understanding your emotions, but also understanding your own strengths and your behavior. Self-management, which is your ability to regulate emotions and behaviors and situations and your thoughts. Social awareness, being able to take the perspectives and empathize with others, even from diverse backgrounds and cultures. Relationship skills, that's all those collaboration skills and communication skills that are so essential. And then, of course, responsible decision making as we move those forward. So right now, we thought we would share some kind of concrete ways that these can be, and that we've implemented some of this in classrooms. And so our friends here, Shannon and Julianne and Margot, are gonna come up and provide you with some of those examples at first. Shannon will start, then Julianne, and then Margot.
Hi, I'm Shannon Axman, and I work at Mendenhall Elementary School, and I am the social emotional teacher there. And I have to say, I do have the best job in the entire district, so I'm just gonna brag about that for a second. Our focus at Mendenhall, primarily the last 2 years, I started this job last year, and I come from a behavior support classroom background, so I've kind of had to flip the script in my own mind as to what to do, because it's somewhat similar, but it's a little bit different. We're working on self-awareness and self-management a lot in regards to, and I sprinkle in everything, but these are the two main things that we are really focusing on the last 2 years, and then I'm going to emerge into the others. We do this through SEL lessons. The first week of school, as you know, the district provides stuff for us, and the teachers really go into that. I do it in the my SEL lessons, and I go into pre-K. I go into the CSC room, which is within our SPED department, and then I go into K through 5th grade. Some I do twice a week, others I do twice a month, depending on the grade level. Right now, we personally are in pre-K in the CSC, as well as K through 3rd. We're working on the brain, which they did the first week of school, but we are talking about our prefrontal cortexes, our amygdalas, and our hippocampuses, and I'm incorporating all of that through artwork, through movement. I'm not a singer, but I do get up and sing, although I do have the gift of dance. So, in my own head. And then we're also relating it to an emotional thermometer, and I have picked this emotional thermometer to use at our school, which has been instrumental in some other things, which I'll talk about quickly. But how the brain relates to this is a one, this is your prefrontal cortex, everything is fine. 2, your amygdala is a little upset, you might be a little disappointed or frustrated, but you can handle it. 3, now your amygdala is really upset, maybe you need the calm down box or a glitter bottle or something. And a 4, you are very dysregulated. You might be crying, you might be really, really angry. And a 5 on our scale means an ambulance, police, or fire truck need to be called. And the reason we have that is because we do have some students who need medical emergencies, and we wanted to distinguish that. Myself, I have epilepsy and and a movement disorder, and I wanted to distinguish those students that we may have an emergency of some type, but that an adult in the room will be taking care of that situation, and our students will not have to worry about that. And that's why we distinguish that. We also do these lessons through role playing, because our students are great actors and they love to role play. And so lots and lots of role playing, because our students need to practice language, they need to practice talking to each other, and they need to practice getting up in front of groups. So we do a lot of that.
So Shannon, you're going into the classroom.
Yes.
And you're giving instruction
Yes.
to the students.
Mhm.
And the teachers have also received instruction through professional development.
Some professional development. There was the C conference, which my another teacher and I, Kate Forche, went and we spoke at. We were going to give one session, and we gave 5 during the C conference. And then we are going. Schools are now asking us to come to their schools, so we have 2 this week, and we've got some others set up. So we're doing professional development that way.
So Shannon, I think
I'm sorry.
you're probably thinking a little narrow in terms of professional learning. What Shannon does when she goes in the classroom is also she's building the skills in the teacher.
Oh, yes. I
To
was
do
gonna- I
that,
was
to
gonna
use
bring
the
that in there.
language, to
Yeah,
do.
okay.
So I think it's
Okay,
not
so
that she does
everybody's
a
learning.
training,
Oh,
but
I'm
while
sorry.
she's in there, she's working.
Okay,
with
so
those
everybody's
things.
By
learning.
professional development, I took it as a teacher.
Yeah.
Yes, in regards to the teachers, how I pull them in is they stay in the classroom so that they hear the language that I'm using, because we say, you are dysregulated. I've had first graders come up to me and say, boy, so-and-so was really super dysregulated. His amygdala was showing. I have pre-K kids that walk down the hall and they're like, my amygdala's right here, I'm super happy. And that happened today about 4 times today.
Yeah.
So they use the language, they use the language that I use. And today the pre-K teacher, and just as an example, because she heard my lesson on the hippocampus, said, your hippocampus needs to remember how to walk down the hallway. Pull it out of your hippocampus. And I said, bring it to your prefrontal cortex today, guys, so that, I'm watching. So that's how the teachers are pulling out that language.
So let's say you've given your instruction, you're now moving on to the
Right.
next
Mhm.
activity, the next classroom. Class is operating, something's going on, a student is feeling
Dysregulated.
something.
Okay.
Okay, so what is that student now going to do when they feel that way? Do they just, excuse me, Miss Brown, I feel this way? How does that play out?
We have tools in place, and I brought some, but I didn't bring them up here because I didn't know if you'd think I was ridiculous or not, but, okay, you don't mind. Okay, we have tools in place within the classroom. We have a calm down box, which I have developed for each classroom, and then here comes my card. Okay. This would be an example of a calm down tool, a hover and spear, so they can do breathing. So we have things like this. Our calm down boxes the tools are significantly smaller. There's a slinky in there. The kids don't call them toys. They know that they're tools. Each classroom has a glitter bottle that our PASAR group did as their community service project. And they made for each classroom. And then I have normed how to do these, and I've normed how to do each tool within the calm down box.
So does the student have the ability to go retrieve an
Anytime
item
they
when
need
they're
it.
feeling that way? They don't
Yes.
need to ask for, they don't need to report, I'm feeling like
They
this.
go right to the calm down box area.
They've been trained what to do.
In that classroom. So if you needed it, you would walk over to it, you would use it. And we always say, don't stop the students. If they use it 5 times during class and they use it, and I will be honest with you, there are very, very few. I can maybe think of 1, maybe 2 that start out using it kind of as a work avoidance, but it stops very, very quickly because they learn the role of it. Other things that they can do, like I had a student come into my room today, it was my prep time, and he came in and he said, I'm feeling really upset because, and he explained, and we sat, sometimes we walk, and I just go for walks with the students. They'll text me, the teachers will text me. I actually had a teacher today come to me and say, I'm really upset about something. I'm like, let's go for a walk. And we walked and talked about it. I've had teachers that I stayed after till like 8 o'clock at night and talking to them. I'm there for the teachers as well as students, and I work with strategies for the teachers to help implement in their classrooms. For them, sometimes it ends up being to help the students, but sometimes it ends up being to help the teachers. Does that make sense? Did I answer your question?
What I'm hoping is this looks pretty similar classroom to classroom, all 44 elementaries in Plano, because in the past it seemed like we wanted to kind of create our own at every school, which is certainly not leveraging best practices. So are all the schools using the glitter, the globe, that sort of thing?
I'm gonna let Mark answer that because I don't wanna misspeak, so, I know the answer.
So a
but-
couple of things that we're trying to normalize across the 44 elementary schools, and each school's in a various place of that. One is breathing, is using breathing, whether that's through Hoverman Sphere, other opportunities for breathing. The second one is having community building circles or morning meetings every day, so that you're building that community and understanding. And it's amazing what kids have told teachers that they've experienced in that time, and it's really brought a level of empathy, not only just with the teacher and the student, but the student and other students. And third is really trying to work on some standardizing some calm down things in those classrooms. I can't say we're there at 44 elementary schools, but those are the things that we're trying to work towards. But beyond that, it's really also about creating a mindset around social emotional learning. And when kids are being dysregulated, how do you approach that kid? Are we approaching that as an acting out kind of behavior? Or are we trying to find out what need that student is trying to tell us they have? And so really trying to build those skills in that.
Are you also sending home very simple information for the parents? So if my child says I'm dysregulated, I know what that means?
Yeah, the
English and Spanish?
campuses, I mean, that's another component of this. They're not there, but campuses are working with their community to bring both teachers and teachers and parents up to speed on what we're trying to do.
I hope that there'd be some common materials. Once again, best practice, we know it works
Yeah.
well, and so if you're at one elementary school versus another, you get the same information, because we're all PISD.
Yeah, so that's some of what we're working on this year, is building those standardized tools for campuses so they can utilize this. The thing is that we didn't want to stop and say, well, wait till we get to here before you move forward with things. And so it's been a situation where some campuses took the work even from our social emotional learning committee last year, as we were working with campuses and building some understanding at the principals meeting or through our lead meetings. And they took it and ran with it on a level that, you know, we didn't want to stop that. But as we move this forward, that is our goal, is to develop some common tools that are going to be utilized throughout this. And as we move forward with our learning standards, that's also going to be a common tool that campuses are going to use as they move this forward.
To me, this is no different than curriculum. If our curriculum is supposed to be the same across 44 elementaries, then this should be as well. I want to do a quick shout out to Marilyn Hinton, our former colleague. She actually advocated for this for almost 5 years. She was using this terminology before most of us knew what it meant. And if you're watching the tape, Marilyn, I kind of hope you're not. Thank you for doing this.
Just super quick, I write the community circle curriculum, and as Mark said, we've had students, and each of the teachers then use the emotional thermometer to check where our students are at. And I sat in on one today, and when if a student's, most of them are ones, but if we have a student at a 3 or a 4, that teacher meets with that student privately, because many times the information that is being provided to the teacher is something that should not be shared with the group, and make checks to see. So it really gives our teachers a tool to check where our students are at emotionally every day, and we were not doing that before. And I've had several teachers come up to me and say, no wonder they're not learning. I mean, if you're coming in at a 4 every day because, you know, this and this and this, like I had no idea. And so that has been very helpful to our teachers. And it's just fun. I mean, to be honest with you, we have kids that love it. I mean, it's just fun. I was standing up on a desk yesterday leading a community circle doing something, and the kids, I mean, they think it's great. Other things that we do I help develop plans for teachers. So if they need a specific lesson, like we had a student who was having super issues with disappointment, I went in and I did a lesson for the whole class. The teacher came and said, I don't know what to do. And I'm like, I can make a lesson for that. And so then I go and I made a lesson for that, and it was for the whole class, because what third grader doesn't have trouble with disappointment at times? And and I tailored it to that particular student, but the other students didn't know that. And then that student was not singled out because it was for the whole class. And then I always try to leave with giving the teachers something. Every lesson I leave, I try to have something. I have a special place in the classroom, and I try to leave with giving them something, either a little poster or something that they can put up. So, and I provide visuals. Some of the extra stuff I do is providing visuals for teachers if they need it, what, you know, chipboards, whatever they need for students, I do then as well, so.
Awesome. Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you.
Hi there. I am Julianne Dean, and I'm the principal at Haggard. And before I get started, I just need to say that this work has been the most rewarding and inspiring work that I have done as a principal. I've been at Haggard for 17 years, and I've been principal for 13. And hands down, I have the best job in the district. I absolutely love what I do. And I am so blessed that I get to lead my staff and my students. But this work has just, every day is a good day for me. Most days are a good day for me. But this work has just, has really inspired me and has just filled my tank and has given me, has rejuvenated me and has given me such intentional purpose. So I am super excited to be doing this work. So I just wanted to say that. So last year, I created a social emotional learning student advisory committee, and it consisted of students from all 3 grade levels, and these students were selected by their teachers as kids who maybe were in need of a little bit of social and emotional learning, or kids who could really advocate and foster and SEL and be ambassadors for this learning. We met bi-monthly every Friday, well, bi-monthly on Fridays at before school for about 45 minutes. And initially our meetings started out as, you know, the kids just talked and talked and talked. And I just mainly just listened and took notes, lots of notes of what the kids were saying and feeling. And from these conversations, we were able to identify some areas, some SEL areas that were, I guess, missing on our campus. And we were able to narrow down really what the kids were telling me. They didn't use the words compassion in self and others and empathy, but I knew that that's what they were trying to communicate and express to me. So we decided to focus our work on how to find compassion and be compassionate with ourselves and to be compassionate with others. And then this whole really abstract idea of empathy, and what is empathy, and what does it look like, and what does it feel like. So from here, I really just, the students were super enthusiastic about this, and I just let them really kind of lead the way and kind of pave the path of learning for us. And they, we created 2 videos. I say we, I don't like being in front of crowds and in front of the camera, so I let the kids, you know, I just kind of facilitated this, and the kids created videos, and one video in the fall and one in the spring. And the first video had to do was about compassion, and we interviewed kids, and they got on the screen and they talked about what compassion means to them. What are examples of compassion? What does compassion look like at Haggard? And then in the spring we did one on empathy, and also we kind of went into some social awareness. They reached out, my kids, we really wanted, and I guess I really wanted kids to drive this, because kids will respond better to their peers. You know, they're gonna listen to their peers. And so they reached out to our advanced art class, and together we they created this beautiful mural, a wall-sized mural in my building that is just words of affirmation and words of inspiration, and just words like "you're beautiful," you're worthy, you're meaningful. We got the idea from Clark High School. But so they tapped into another student group. They tapped into their peers, and they got this advanced art class, and together they worked with the teacher on this mural. They also reached out to our Theater 3 kids, and together they created these skits that the kids performed during our lunches for the student body. And the skits were about, again, compassion, and the theme of compassion and empathy. And they our group, our CELSAC group, that's what we called our group. They decorated our walls with just visuals and artwork and quotes and words of inspiration, and so we really had this print-rich environment. So every hallway you walked down, you walked into the restroom, and there were words and about that just focused on that were reminders about compassion and empathy. And you go to the water fountain, and there's something, artwork in front of you at the water fountain. They came on to the morning announcements over the PA, and they talked about compassion and empathy, and they interviewed their teachers, and they quoted their teachers over the announcements. And we also created, with the help of our counselors, some mini lessons that we brought into the classrooms during our Friday Zap time. And we've incorporated 30 minutes into our day every Friday from 3 to 3:30, where it's an opportunity for kids to be held accountable for work that they haven't completed. And so we just kind of incorporated these lessons into that time. And then we finished the school year with doing a student climate survey. And I reached out to Paul Dabbs, who works in assessment accountability, and he helped me create, this is when the committee said, we're hands off, that's your that's your job. But we created a survey that mirrored a student climate survey that Austin ISD conducted with their students. And so from those results, I reviewed and studied those results over the summer, because we conducted this survey pretty late in the spring. We took those results, and this is what is bringing us into this school year. And so I got smart, and I recruited teachers and counselors to help me on this committee, because it's big work. It's huge. And so and simultaneously, our counselors have been receiving training in professional learning about SEL. So I created now a social emotional learning student teacher advisory committee, and it consists of teachers who volunteered. I didn't tap anyone to join the committee. Teachers volunteered, and our counselors volunteered, and then some of our same students from last year, but some of them moved on to Vines, and then some new students. And again, it's, we meet bi-monthly on Fridays, and we took the results from the survey, and we've been able to narrow down to 3 topics that really align with the SEL standards, the district SEL standards. And so we're focusing on self-awareness and how to regulate one's emotions, and like what Shannon was talking about, that they're teaching so much at elementary schools. And then we also how to better handle stress, because the number of kids that our counselors and administrators are seeing who are suffering with trauma and crises at home, and they don't know how to regulate their emotions. And we're also talking about how to better handle stress. Because we have kids who are 10, 11 years old coming to us with stress that is just, it's unfathomable, you know? So, we're making sure that our work is in alignment and it's congruent with what, you know, the district's work. So we have, I've kind of modified the ZAP Fridays, and it's going to be Friday ZAP SEL time, and I've carved out 13 days in the school year where we can just do 13, where we're going to bring in 13 lessons into that SEL, our SEL Fridays. And so we have kids who are creating videos with the help of the counselors, and we're pulling a lot of ideas from the Momentous Institute, and we're using this really cool thing called Screencastify, where the kids can pre-record the lessons with teachers and counselors, and then we just kind of just incorporate it into the classrooms. So it's no more work for the teachers. They don't have to create the lessons. They just have to facilitate the lessons, because the kids are driving the instruction or the SEL learning through the video, through that Screencastify. So we're, like this Friday, we're all meeting and we're gonna do, do these videos, and then we can just roll it out into the classroom. So it's not taking away from any of that SEL time, where we can really spend that time getting into the work. And then we're going to just, we've had one meeting, we're having our second meeting, so we're just really building momentum for this year. But it's, we have lots of ideas. I'm constantly, reading about SEL and going to conferences and spending time at Momentous, or just talking to people and stealing ideas from other, principals, or so it's exciting. It's incredibly valuable work that we're doing, and I just want to say that I think that the biggest lesson for me that I've learned is we have to listen to the kids, because we can't assume that we know how to help these kids unless we ask them, how can we help you? What is it that you need? Because the kids will talk, they'll talk and they'll talk if they trust you first and if they know you care, but we have to listen to the kids, because they're going through issues that we as adults, we can't relate to, because we've never experienced them, So it's great work, and that's just some of the kind of concrete, intentional things that we're doing at Haggard. And I could go on and on, but Dash just really blew my presentation. Yes, ma'am.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
I know that middle school is a time when social media and texting and that sort of thing come into play. Are you addressing that at all in this SEL?
Yes, we have lessons designed, and one of the lessons is about social media, and we're actually spending a day, lesson 7. We're spending that class we're gonna have all the kids who do have access to social media, or and those kids who don't have access to it, we'll make sure that they get involved, but we're gonna have kids, post on Instagram and Snapchat and their Facebook and just everything, where something, positive, where it's, and we're gonna hashtag it. We haven't created the hashtag, but we're just going to be, because it is an issue. It's so damaging, to kids when they misuse it, it can be a great thing, and that's what we're hoping to teach them, what good can come, that you can make such a positive impact on others but yes, social media is always right there at the forefront of.
Okay.
Thank you, Julianne.
Okay,
Did you have something?
Yeah, I had a question really, and because in what we're doing in the elementary school, where it's almost as if the students are on a daily basis, right, they're analyzing themselves, and this is your self-awareness and self-management component to that. How are we linking that to the middle school? I mean, eventually, as the program evolves and as all of our kids have gone through it from kindergarten all the way, that will naturally occur. But are we doing any kind of link now to create in your sixth graders the ability for that daily introspection?
You know, I think we're not so deliberate as they are in elementary school, just because, and my experience has only been at middle school. You know, our teachers have, 60 minutes worth of curriculum to teach in a 50-minute class period. So we really can't carve out time to teach them about, and really that just, we start doing this at middle school and they're gonna be doing something else with the hand signs, So we try to, when the moment naturally arises, we do talk to them about, we do use glitter balls and we do try to talk to them about, teach them the skill, the social skills, because they don't have them. And so we are using restorative circles, and we use, we try to, our approach to kids who are dysregulated or having any sort of emotional breakdown or outburst, we try to take the time and talk to them and teach them, and we don't take a punitive approach. How could you recognize how you handled this situation, and if you're put in this situation again, how can you handle it? What can we do differently next time? So we do try to be intentional and make, maximize those teachable moments, but we can't.
Yeah, I think some of the work we're going to be doing this year is really trying to find out how do you carve time out to do this important work at the schools. I think schools have tried to carve out, like Julianne talked about, they've carved out some time on Friday by taking some passing period time away. But she talked about restorative practice. I was going to talk a little bit more about that later, but part of that is building community and having community circles. And we're seeing more and more of our secondary campuses utilize community circles, and in that time, many times there's some kind of a feeling check associated with that, so they're able to share how they're feeling at that time. And that's, one of the things when we had the students come and talk to us, they said people tell us to talk about our feelings, but nobody ever tells us how. And so it's really trying to build that over time. But we are, as you move into the secondary realm, it becomes more challenging to find the time to be able to do that. But we're working with those campuses to try to make that happen.
Well, I think, what I would envision or what I would expect to happen is as students matriculate through, those who started in kindergarten learning self-awareness and self-management, it is second nature by the time you get to sixth grade. So you're not having to spend that time. They're doing it on the way to school. But we're a long way from transitioning those kids from kindergarten to middle school. And so what are we doing in between?
Yeah, and in middle school, affiliation needs are so high. And so that social awareness piece really lifts up at that time. I was reading a report the other day, talked about bullying, that bullying peaks in middle school and then it goes down. And so really helping with that, I think, gets to that too, because a lot of those are social situations that bring up some of those strong emotions and feelings if it's not there. So that's one of the things we're working on. And then Margot's going to talk a little bit about how she's doing some work with that at the high school.
Good evening. Thought I'd never make it here. Okay, I'm Margot Spence, one of the counselors at Vines. When you look back at our definition, the we was critical for me throughout the entire process. So being high school, of course, SEL is going to look different. The learning of it, the delivery of it. So for me on our campus, it was very important to start with the adults. So I did that initially, easing them, because high school is a whole different animal when it comes to everything, from testing, objectives, just everything. So I eased them in by emailing out videos and talking about and introducing them to SEL. Then I had Brian McCord come in to a staff meeting and do some different activities with us that teachers can use in the classroom, but I started it with them. So and then Adam Sines, we heard Adam Sines talk, a psychologist, using his wellness wheel and how SEL applies to adults. So, and in part of that wheel was not just your physical health, your emotional health, your financial health, so everything that applies to adults. So that's where we started at Vines, because I also felt, how can we expect our teachers to deliver social emotional lessons when they're not social emotional, in tap with themselves or healthy? So for me, it was important that we started there with high school. After that, implementing it at the high school. Of course, we don't have the little ones and they're not, as impressionable. So when we look at CASEL, looking at relationship skills and responsible decision making, that's where we have kind of honed in, and with community circles. So where we've been able to most effectively and the most practical approach is community circles at the high school for us at Vines. So
Sorry, what does that mean, a community circle?
restorative practices. So using restorative practices to help students, if there's a conflict, instead of being punitive, bringing in the individuals that are affected by the situation, sitting them down, talking together, talking it out. Again, that relationship focus, responsibility for self. So, and community circles can be done if there's a conflict, but they can also be done in the classroom. So if an English teacher, if there's a novel that they're reading and it's a relationship focused novel, or there's any type of trauma going on in that book, an English teacher can have a community circle discussing the characters or the circumstances of that story. So it's twofold, but for counseling, it's a very effective method just because of what we do and how we're able to deliver it. One of the community circles that we had about a month ago was with a group of boys, 8 boys who probably meet each of the, when we were looking at the test data, some of the subgroups: economically disadvantaged, special education, African American, Hispanic, just some things going on in the building. And it's like, I was like, okay, I gotta do something about this. So we started this community circle, and that was a month ago. None of them have had any discipline infractions since then. I check on them regularly, we meet, we've set goals. And for them, it was amazing because, one, how open and transparent they became toward the end of that. We brought them together because of a conflict, but by the end of it, we realized the needs that were not being met for each young man in that group. So it's developed trust, that circle. And I asked some of them, well, how did it make you feel when we first had the first circle? What did you think by the end of it? And one of the young men said, the circles are to bring us together and stop the mess and the confusion. So that's from a 9th grade boy. And another one said, it means they care and want us to do better. So for the students who, some of us are not sure how to approach, it's just about really being human, letting them know you're human. We all make mistakes. We're all coming, even as adults, we're all coming with different issues. So meeting the kids where they are, because we don't know all of the circumstances, So the community circles are working for us, again, instead of being punitive, and that was one of my questions, what is discipline gonna look like in SEL? And really it is about sitting down and talking, because you have no idea what one came in with, in the morning, or so just even teachers stopping students at the door, just a simple good morning, eye-to-eye contact is amazing for some of these kids and what it does. So just the dialogue that leads to the understanding of how they can resolve situations and conflict without it, things blowing up, disrupting the environment, and then just repairing and restoring relationships, and that trust is a major piece at the high school level. So, and one of our last most recent activities, we also had the special education councils come in. Janine Boss and their team came in and did some professional development with the staff as well. And that's, again, was about trauma and some activities for the staff. So we're just kind of trying to reach the adults, show the adults while we implement it with the students at Vines.
How many students do you have oversight for as a counselor?
About 300.
And so how can you do that for 300 kids? It's just, it seems like an overwhelming task, which once again hits to resources.
Well, I will say, in my previous life, I've had far more than 300. So, but that's also why being intentional in doing the circles as situations arise is just, it's, and then of course you have your one-on-one, you know, when I'm in my office, using the breathing and just the calming down strategies of students. So it just depends on the needs of the students, whether it's 10 at a time, 1 or 2 at a time. But yeah, we're doing our best. Okay.
We just need to do our best for you.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your high school, middle school, and elementary experiences.
Yeah, so, I mean, so as you see, they look different at different levels, and we're really trying to glean this year on what does that need to look like at each level so that we can provide more resources and tools for campuses as they roll this out. So I just, and I'm not gonna go over this, I'm gonna go over this pretty quickly, but just at the work that we did last year on 2016-17, there's some things that every department took on and implemented in terms of some issues. The first 5 days that they talked about from at the elementary campuses, secondary academic service really made iLead a very focused time where time was given at every iLead meeting around social emotional learning. Professional learning was involved in that and had some goal groups as well as lifting that up and other flexible professional learning opportunities. The Human Resource Department helped develop some questions as you interview teachers that might glean what might an SEL focused person coming to you look like. And then, you know, we did, last year was our first year for our social emotional teacher leaders on our campuses that really were focused in trying to, you know, help teachers implement this in the classroom, because one of the things we found out the previous year is that the training wasn't useful if we don't provide resources for teachers ongoing to support that implementation as we move that forward. So some things that we're doing this year across the different areas. One, we are partnering with Momentous this year at our pre-K sites in implementing their Settle Your Glitter curriculum. With that, we're helping them refine what that looks like, but it's also enabled us to get some very strong training from them, as well as some support for our SEL teachers as well. So they're coaching and mentoring our SEL teachers that are involved with those pre-K sites. We continued on with the first 5 days. We've done some professional learning around that. Secondary curriculum, each of the areas have taken some things and moved those forward. Human Resources had some learning for our 0-year teachers, specifically about their own social emotional health and how do you maintain that balance and sense of well-being. And they're also looking to how can we help teachers' well-being, and is that impactful in terms of retention and stress reduction on our staff. In the professional learning group, they're continuing with their goal groups, their flex learning in that, as well as some book studies that they put in place for around social emotional learning in collaboration with our group. We continue to see campuses with initiatives that we are focusing. A lot of our principal PLCs or learning committees will be focused around social emotional learning to build that capacity in that. Continue with our SEL teachers. Some of the things we're doing in student and family services is we're going back and aligning our counseling and guidance to our SEL standards so that we have common language with that. Some of the things we're doing on suicide prevention that we've talked to you about previously, the YAMS program, some new curriculum we've put into place. The other thing is we have an initiative with our counselors at the secondary level of really trying to find intentional ways to connect to their students. You know, as Margot said, she has 300 kids. So how can she find ways to connect where they know who she is and she knows who they are? So they're really working on trying to find out what are best practices in terms of that. And there's a few other things that are listed there, but Kind of the last thing is we're working on developing those tools to help campuses assess where they are and develop as they move forward with that. Kind of our goal this year is to really work on that social emotional mindset and trying to bring that about, as well as some awareness. We're doing a lot of work with restorative practices, which is highly aligned with that in our discipline management meetings. So every administrator is going through some training on how do you lead that process, and really that is, Tammy, as you know, some of that is about with restorative, you look at not it as a rule being broken, but as harm being caused. So how do you go about repairing that harm? So part of that is you have to have a strong community to begin with, so there's community building in that, but then it's all, how do we repair that once that happens? And we're doing some training with our administrators on that. And we're seeing some promising results in terms of climate and culture and some of our discipline data at this point.
Well, I'm really impressed with what I've heard tonight, and I know that always we want to see academic outcomes, and you've already given data that shows that there is an academic outcome to this, but we're creating better citizens.
Yep.
And I guess David and Tammy hit on this, but I think we ought to make it intentional, because like Julianne said, at Haggard they're doing these wonderful things, but then as those students move on to the high school level, will they have had the same similar social emotional learning so that they can have a pathway into that senior high experience? I guess that's where I would hope that we have a good transition for every school that goes into that particular high school, every elementary that moves into that middle school, you know, so that we're doing the same good things.
Yeah, I would agree. That's kind of where we want to end up.
Yeah.
It's you know, they just take time to get there, but that's definitely where we want to end up, is that kids have an experience around social emotional very similar to how they have our experience from an academic standpoint.
Can you share a little detail on the development of the standards?
Mm-hmm. So we looked at so there's some states out there that have adopted some standards around that learning, as well as some districts. Anchorage, Alaska, they probably derived a lot from the Anchorage, Alaska standards. Anchorage has been doing this work since about '94. They actually predate Castle in their work with that. And so Austin actually used them a lot in developing their standards and looking at that. So we took 5 or 6 or 8 different standards and really looked at what we felt like would meet our needs, knowing that this is a working document that we may be looking at revising as we go along. You know, we made some decisions about how do you group these standards? Do we go all the way down by each grade level? And we decided for now, where we are, kind of breaking it to those primary grades and then and moving those up was probably the better way to do it.
So one of the things I have to say, at least in my opinion, this is one of the most important pieces of work that we can do here. My career, if we can call it here on the board, really started teaching higher education and seeing that the kids there are not ready. And it's not that they're not ready because they don't know math or they don't know science or anything else. It's they're not ready for life. They don't have those skills. And that's why it was important for me, at least, to be here. This is great work. I'm really pumped by what I see here. The 3, in my opinion, and that's, you know, take it with a grain of salt, the 3 most important values, I think, are accountability. That's one thing. I would like to see our kids accountable for their own actions, being held accountable, holding themselves accountable, holding their peers accountable. Resilience, and all those, by the way, those words are actually coming from your document. They're there. I know that they're there. Resilience. If there's one thing that can provide, that can prevent teen injury and teen suicide, it's the resilience that we give them. The stronger they are, the more they're capable of handling things, the less likely they are to commit suicide. There's, I think, the growth, the highest growth in suicide rates is teens at the age of 18. That's the highest growth group. And the third one is empathy. I'll go back to empathy, and I will insist, at least from my position, that empathy is different than compassion, as you lump them together, I had to think about examples, so I have 4 examples for you. There is a discipline called design thinking. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's a new way of designing. It has 5 building blocks. Building block number 1 is empathy. It has nothing to do with compassion. It has everything to do with understanding how people use products or services. Another one is your ability to conduct sales job. A sales job really relates to your ability, to your empathy to your customer, not compassion, understanding what they need and what they don't. Negotiations, your ability to understand where the other side is coming from to get to a better solution, and customer support at the end. Again, not compassion. That's empathy. I think empathy by itself is. Compassion is something that comes afterwards, but empathy by itself is very powerful. So again, this is great work. This will potentially make significant difference, not just in academics, in how well they're prepared for life.
Yeah, I echo Yoram's sentiment. I think this is just phenomenally
Which one? I didn't
work.
stop for 5 minutes.
This will create a different culture. I mean, this has the potential to change culture in an entire school district, and I cannot wait to see what this looks like in 12 years and what this district looks like in 12 years and what its students look like, because I think it has the ability to the last of the core competencies is responsible decision making, and I think if we can graduate kids and put them out into the world and they're responsible decision makers, that's pretty much all you could ask for, you could hope for. And I applaud the work y'all have done, and am anxious to continue watching how this all evolves.
Mark, I want to say that your approach to this is very positive, and that what I'm so glad about the presentations by Shannon, Julianne, and Margot is that you're training the teachers while you're helping the students. And so I'm glad that you're incorporating training the teachers while you're helping a wide range of students. So that's just a very good presentation.
I think just to reflect back on what Yoram and Dr. Solomon and Shirley were saying was that we started, the first question we started the social emotional learning committee in our work was, what do we want the children in our schools to look like as an adult, or to be like as an adult? That's where we started, and so all the work was grounded on that.
And I like that statement from your mission statement. From your mission statement, there was a line there that said, "Contributing members of society."
Right.
That's key.
Well, I'll jump in there, Mark, and I have to give a shout out. I bugged you to death over our suspension and discipline data, which are very good. We have driven down almost every category of discipline. I think because of this work. But I will tell you, I've been in a lot of our elementary schools recently, and they're in circles. And it's not just playtime. It is our young people understanding how to care about each other, how to support each other. Because in the end, part of that is we're all going to be really good, and we're going to help each other be that way. And this is how we do that. And then when we go afoul, we come together and say, hey, let's figure that out. And so you can see it right now. And Julianne, I'm looking, your index 1 scores have gone up 2 years in a row. I think that pales in comparison to what is happening for young people who will be better able to build better communities, lives, employees, world. I really believe that, right? So I just thank you for this work. It's planting a tree that many of us may never sit under. We can't, it's hard to quantify how much this will make a difference. But watching it already, I'm convinced that it will. I told you we had one of our student advisory kids last month who watched this at an elementary school. Am I right? Since she was in tears because she got it. She said, how good human beings will they be? Right? And so I applaud all of you for seeing that. We just had Dash's 3-hour presentation. Julianne, is that how long it went? Oh, a little over that? Yeah, and you know what? Because by the same token, when these things merge as you teach, right? You don't have a lesson on compassion necessarily. You teach compassion by being compassionate, right? You teach empathy by living that as you teach and as you care about each other. And we are really working hard to do that, and I thank you for that work.
So I'll wrap this up by just saying, you've heard everybody echo the same sentiment. This is how we change society. And even though we're measured as schools on certain factors, in Plano, we've always believed in doing the right thing, regardless of the way that others may measure us. And this, to me, is another example of doing the right thing. And it will be measured based upon the productive human beings that we're creating. And in schools, you are asked to do far more than just teach or be instructors. Your coaches, your mothers, your fathers, your aunts and uncles, your trust building, you're so having to be so much that children need in order to just learn. And much of what we need for them to learn to be productive human beings is not taught at home, in many homes. So I'm very supportive. I'm fully in with this initiative. And I love that we have the
Social emotional teacher.
this teachers at elementary. I would love that we would have that also at secondary, so that it's not just the principal having to also factor that into his or her bandwidth calculations, of the things that he or she's, also managing. The salesmanship club that, raises the money to support the Momentous Institute and this work, these are like the titans of our local industry. They are so behind this. They are so bought in. I mean, these are the big names of people that we probably all are familiar with. This isn't easy to measure, but they know how important it is, too. It's really transformative to society. So, and teachers, thank you for being here. I know we've asked you to spend more time, but that your being here to share what you're doing in your classroom has really contributed to helping us to understand why this is so important. So thank you. Okay, our third report this evening is on the GPA Class Rank Advisory Committee Structure Report, information only. Susan Modisette will present the proposed structure for the committee study of weighted grade point averages. Ms. Modisette.
Thank you, President Bender. Just to segue in, I just can't thank each of you enough for the support and affirmation that you provided tonight with our work on social emotional learning, and you each captured part of I think both what the challenge and what the reward has been in sticking with this. This committee has done an amazing job, but I really have to say, and Julianne said this well, it has reignited the spark in lots of adults in our district who are reigniting sparks in a lot of our children. So I just can't thank you enough for your support. What I'd like to share with you next is our thinking behind and proposal for the committee structures for the next leg of study on weighted grade point average. What we would propose is having two groups. The first being a work study committee, which would be comprised of about 30 educational professionals, very similar to the class rank committee, in that there would be representation from academic services, campus services, counseling, teachers, campus administrators, but then also we would add to this representation for advanced academics, on-level academics, fine arts, drill and cheer, athletics, and CTE. In this group would be primarily tasked with kind of doing the heavy lifting. So they would be analyzing research, analyzing current state and national trends and practices and policies around weighted grade point average, objectively studying potential effects in our own district on weighted grade point average and what that, how that may impact student course collection, and then just very objectively to study all options. One of the things that we started each of our class rank meetings with, and we'll do this again with grade point, is reminding everybody at the table that we all come with individual experiences, and those experiences have shaped what our opinions are. But as a work study committee or an advisory committee, our role is really to try to the best of our ability to put those aside and to be very objective learners and scholars about the information that's in front of us. And then the last responsibility of the work study committee would be to report progress at various checkpoints to our advisory council and to solicit feedback from them. Proposed for our advisory council, this would be a much larger group made up of about 60 individuals, and we would like to hire a facilitator to help us with that. And this group is really where our voices and perspectives of all of the different groups that are tied to this work can be highly regarded and heard from. This group would be comprised of about 6 to 10 students, and those students would be selected to represent a range of interest, grade point average, and senior high feeders, so geographic location, and about 23 to 25 parents. 3 of those parents would be selected from a random drawing. Others would be selected by principals to again represent a range of students, GPAs, interest, and senior high feeder pattern. Once we finalized this composition, we'll work with our principals then to establish an impartial and unbiased process for them to select parents and students to fill those categories. Additionally, we'd look at including 14 teachers, and the teachers again would come from across our district, representing weighted and non-weighted academic and elective offerings. 6 counselors, 3 administrators, and then 4 coordinators, 2 from academic areas and 2 from elective areas. And this advisory council would be tasked with learning, hearing the summarized research findings that the work group will share with them, providing feedback at these various checkpoints, to thoughtfully consider and then suggest to the work study group challenges, advantages, and disadvantages that they hear or see in the options presented. They'd be charged with communicating and listening to perspectives represented, because there will be very purposefully a wide range of perspectives represented. and then asked to serve in an impartial and open-minded manner.
I actually had a question about the composition of the advisory committee. Since there are a lot of oars on here, there could be 26 students or parents, definitely 4 students, and definitely 3 parents, the way this is articulated. And I was just a little worried that we were light in our, in essence, community representation. You're gonna have 30 folks on the committee that are all school district employees. On the advisory committee, almost half, 27 are. And so I was concerned we might need more representation from parents and students. I also was a little bit curious about how maybe from one high school you'd have a student, another high school would be a parent in that top tier. And I was wondering if we could actually maybe do pairs, parent-student pairs would represent, which would give more voice to the community and also not have this kind of strange relationship where sometimes it's a student, sometimes it's a parent filling that role. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I'll talk about your first point because it's one we wrestled a little bit with about in our original thinking. We did leave that open-ended, student or parent. I'll share the thinking. We feel like there needs to be enough students so that their voice is not lost. And so we were thinking if we had 6 to 10 of those spots available that were filled by students, and then that would leave 23 to 25 spots that would be filled by parents. That would give a fairly nice representation. Part of, and certainly we can add to this, we currently have 60, 33 that would be parent or student, and 26 that would be teacher, counselor, administrator, coordinator. One of the things I think we want to consider is in a room of 60, and really wanting this group to be able to provide feedback from a large number rather than a few. It's hard to find where the sweet spot is in making sure that we have ample representation, but that we don't have so many people that half the group never gets an opportunity to speak.
So I wonder if the advisory committee almost needs to be in 2 parts, where you continue to have the district employees who have some very important perspectives, if they're teacher in a weighted course versus teacher in a not weighted course, but not diminish the voice of the parents and the students. We heard from our community that they really want to be heard, and I just want to make sure we don't slight that in any way.
So right now, the ratio is more community input, more community representation than district representation.
Well, if you look at the advisory council, but then you also
Yes.
have the committee that has 30 district employees. And so if you look at the totality of who will be weighing in on this, it's heavily weighted for the district.
But the amount of work that will be done by the committee, I'm guessing, is that they're going to meet a lot more often than the advisory group, and asking the community to participate in all of the committee meetings more often, I think that you may not have enough volunteers to be there. I was actually pretty surprised to see that there are 60 here. That's, facilitating 60. I need to meet that facilitator after they're done.
Well, my point is not to have the community attend all the committee meetings, but I'm
Right.
just saying, when you look at the voices that we're going to hear, we've got 30 voices we're gonna hear on the committee, and then we've got 60 on the council, the advisory council, but half of those are also employees here. So it might make sense to break that advisory council up into 2 parts, maybe a few more parents and students, so our community voice is not dampened.
The value that I see in having a composition that is co-ed, if you will, with, the different hats people are wearing, is that it's informative both ways. So I feel like staff, teachers, that's really the representation here, teachers of certain kinds of courses. could talk about ideas from their point of view that a parent or student wouldn't even think about, and vice versa. So I think there's great learning. So I like the idea of having a commingled composition, just personally.
I wanted to echo Tammy's comment. I do feel like overall, it might be a little weighted too much towards staff. And I would ask my colleagues and even staff, correct me if I'm wrong, in our July work session, when this first came up, at least with this newly formed board, did we not talk about board members sort of nominating people for this process? I thought I recalled that, to the
So-
point where I even had a list that I had generated,
So
but I don't see that reflected. So if I'm wrong, I'd be happy to.
No, you're right. I remember that we did mention that you were going to point some.
So at the same work session, we also talked about asking the staff to make sure that they identified the constitution of that committee structure that would be productive to evaluate this topic. And the composition definition has been given here, saying we need representation from certain geographies, I'm assuming different kinds of high schools, different kinds of grade point distributions, different kinds of representation of different activities and such. So that request has come now. That definition has occurred from staff, fulfilling that commitment to the board. The idea of board members appointing, how would we know whether an individual meets a certain criteria, and which individual is selected if there are 20 individuals that meet that criteria? So what staff is suggesting is that there will be a process to define, they've defined the criteria. There will be a process of selection. So those same individuals that may have expressed an interest will follow this process to perhaps get selected in a neutral fashion. So to make sure that the committee is populated with the representation that is needed, this is the process that has been recommended that we follow for review.
I would also pop in, having watched the Huffman Committee work done, when you have a balance of staff and community. Staff are there because that's their job, even if it's late in the evening. The community doesn't necessarily prioritize every single meeting the same way that a staff member, so you often end up underrepresented at those committee meetings with our community members. That's just the reality of it, versus someone whose paid job is to be there. So that's why I would advocate still for more parents and students, so those voices are heard.
I have two questions, or maybe one question, one comment. How do we differentiate the work of the committee, which is all staff, and the advisory council? Is the advisory council bringing forward their experiences and opinions and, information to the study committee, the work study committee? And then the other question, or the question I have is, on the advisory council, do we have any definition of IB school or IB student representation, or will that fall out naturally with the GPA? That's just two things I was noticing.
Two good questions. I'll start with your first one, Nancy. The way we've envisioned this is that the advisory committee will really, I guess I would use the term sounding board. So they're going to have a very broad representation of experiences. As the work study committee begins to look at options and bring those forward, so let's say at the second meeting there are 5 options on the table that are presented and feedback is solicited on. and the advisory, that what may come from that is they find more challenges than benefits in any of those, and ask, this really doesn't seem to be the right path, or they begin to give feedback on, to the work committee to go back and look at other options, to perhaps explore different pathways. So their perspective certainly will be important, because what resonates with one person based on their experience may be very different than what resonates with another. Am I answering your question?
Yes, and I think that what might be helpful is on that GPA work study committee, if we understand what the goals and objectives are. Is that?
Yeah, so the work study committee, their goals and objectives would really be to analyze research, to do the look for trends, explore what other districts have done, what benefits there are, to explore what effects right now we think our current system may have, positive or not. And really their charge is to objectively study all options.
Okay, and then they seek input from the advisory council. Okay. just
So
wanted
will
to
they do,
clarify.
will the research committee do that work first, take the results of that to the advisory council, then they get feedback from the advisory council?
Correct.
Okay.
It really, I think the work study group will get a start. I mean, they'll have to have done some amount of work before they're ready to report, but it will be a formative report. I mean, they won't wait until they're nearing the end, because we'll want to be soliciting feedback throughout the process.
So I might suggest, and maybe Tammy, this kind of goes to your point, that maybe you start with the advisory council, but not necessarily providing where we are or anything like that, but kind of big picturing what's the desired outcome, and what's the input of the advisory council, and get parent and student feedback in terms of kind of the vision, and then allow your committee to work off of that, your research committee, in such a way that certainly they're going to go and look at what other school districts are doing, but they'll have kind of an idea as to what the committee's thinking is up front as they go into their research. I don't know if there's value that, if that provides the more opportunity of what you're looking for community input, but to me it does.
I think as a board, first as a subcommittee and then as a board, we did approve 4 or 5 outline
6
guides.
Yeah.
And so I think that has been out there. But I do think it's very important to ask these folks their opinion. I think that's been a long-term frustration with serving on any Plano committee, is you're presented to and they never ask you anything. I think certainly with the elementary committee, we made some big steps forward there. There were different ways where the committee members were allowed to articulate their beliefs, and having a facilitator will help a lot. So I think it's very important we ask and let the advisory committee even kind of present to the body if they choose to. But I think we'd outlined some guidelines already.
Yes, we did, and they are incorporated here, the 6 bullets. The 2 points, 2 comments that I wanted to make. One is kind of what Tammy said. The engagement of the advisory committee or council, that should really start at the front end with more open-ended questions rather than here are options 1, 2, and 3. We've already done the work. Options 1, 2, and 3. Which one do you choose? So start more with collecting input. That's the whole point of why we have community members there. I'm not in favor of raising the number of even whether it's community or the advisory committee in general. I mean, just think about the logistics. You have 60 people there. If every person speaks for 5 minutes, that's 5 hours. You have a meeting for 5 hours, not including breaks. And think about you going to a meeting and you're going to be sitting through 5 hours, and during those 5 hours you will have 5 minutes to speak. I hope that the facilitator is going to consider something like breaking them into tables or something like that, so that there's a lot more interaction, and then as you start consolidating input that you get from different tables, that's probably more effective than trying to treat them as a body of 60.
Well,
But
we have experience with the
Yeah.
Academy Visioning
Mhm.
Committee, so we could probably shoot in that direction as far as the way the organization of the advisory council works. But I have to almost agree with you that adding more people to, not that I don't want community representation, but adding more people to that council will have almost too many cooks in the kitchen. It's feasibility would be questioned.
So,
I challenge you, take roll and tell me by the end how many non-district people are there. It'll be a low number.
What?
If-
How many?
As the committee meetings unfold, you will have great representation from the school district employees because that's part of their job to be there. We'll only start with 27 community members, and by the last meeting, if you have 10 there, I'll buy you a steak. I mean, it trails off very quickly, and so that's part of the challenge.
okay, so given what I've heard, I'm gonna make some recommendations. Number one, for, and I know you're already working on this, let us know what your neutral selection process looks like. I know you will. Number two, when those individuals put their name in to begin with, to even be considered in the neutral process, ask them to make a commitment for attendance of a certain value, okay? And if they don't meet that, then they don't get to continue.
Get alternates.
What?
Have alternates.
Well, yeah, maybe have alternates,
Yes.
but then they would be lost
Mhm.
perhaps in the process. But, you know, let's set the expectations up front. This isn't just to show up, put your name on a committee and add it to your resume opportunity. This is a voice, and you have to be there to have a voice. That's number two. Number three, can you let us know, I think we've heard some members say they'd like to understand from a process point of view, how can this council be engaged in an upfront fashion? So can you explain what that could look like? Number three. And number four, when you are reporting back to the board, how things are going, let's do a process check and see how attendance is going. And if the composition is appropriate, if there's any adjustment midstream that we need to make early rather than later in the process. So those are the four things. Is that fair? Is there anything that anyone can't live with?
No, but there was one point that Greg brought up that we had potentially talked about in July as board members appointing. I guess that could lend a way to add community members to the committee.
My concern with that, Nancy, is
The composition.
the composition and skewing voices. That's my concern.
Okay.
But that can happen either way. And when you choose somebody, when the principal chooses somebody to the committee, you don't know if you're skewing or not until the work is done.
So I don't know what the criteria will be for, those particular selections.
Well, clearly we wouldn't know what's inside people's thoughts, but we would know what their background is. So we would, when we look at diverse representation, we're really trying to look at very high achieving students, 20% students in the, from across different walks of lives of our students. So the selection process would guarantee that.
If I could suggest a possible compromise,
Go ahead.
is that the names that have been suggested, could we at least vet them to see if they do fit any of the criteria, or just a thought?
I don't want to give preferential treatment to anybody, personally.
Oh, I'm not asking.
And so if, those names, just along with any other names, I think should go in the hopper and I think there should be a neutral selection process, so that those who fit the standards can all be considered equally. So but I think a person would need to go through whatever the process is for submission, which I don't think will be onerous, in order to make those commitments of attendance and whatever things that are important. Maybe there's a process of vetting, hey, does your student really fit into this category? Does your student really participate in these things?
Can I suggest one guiding principle, and it kind of it would make sense. I just want to keep that in front of us. Let's make sure that the community members that we bring on this committee are a true representation of the community in Plano, or Plano ISD. Let's make sure that that's a guiding principle, that it's a true representation.
So how do we do that? I mean, representation geographically?
I'll leave it to Susan, so that we'll feel, or that you will feel, that the community members that we have there are a true representation of the entire PISD constituent.
Could I ask a follow-up question? Do you feel that the outline of what we've proposed is going to do that?
The outline that you're proposing here, I think, will offer the academic level diversity, and I looked at the numbers that you have of how many compared to how many students, so that's a very good representation. You have good geographic representation. Let's make sure that if there is any other dimension to be considered, that we consider that as well.
Well, I think one of the things that Missy laid out was an ask for staff to come back and tell us what that neutral selection process would look like. And so, you know, they can come back at a future meeting, tell us what that process will look like, and we will have the opportunity to sign off to make sure you feel that we're not relying on Susan to dictate that this is the committee is an accurate representation. We have the ability to weigh in and approve that.
You know, one potential method could be creating some kind of Google form with certain kind of criteria, and an interested individual would click off all the criteria that their, you know, their parent or the child meets, and then that goes through some process of filtering and such. So that might, you know, meet some of the things that you're mentioning.
Just to be a little lighthearted for a moment, you really need to watch the people drawn out of the hat. I was the one drawn out of the hat for the Huffman Site-Based Improvement Committee, which put me on my path to board service. So you watch those people.
Obviously, we haven't taken this forward yet, but a very simple thought in kind of an unbiased selection would be for each of the high schools to make known, to advertise through their e-news and however that they're soliciting input of interested parents and students. They would have a easy way for a parent, I mean, really, we don't even need to ask parents to, what is your child's GPA? The school can then look at that and they can, these are parents that fit this category, or these are parents, and draw out of a hat, but then select from those interested within that group. I'm hesitant to take it forward to principals until you all feel comfortable with.
So you will advertise an application process, and then you will, I think, as Missy outlined it, put together an application, and with that is a commitment form, or, you know, somehow have them understand that this is a commitment. We don't want people trailing off because we have designated a certain number that we need actively participating.
I think that would be part of both what we publicize up front. You know, if you're interested, know that this would likely involve 4 to 6 evening meetings that we would really want your guaranteed attendance.
So of those individuals that may have contacted you to express an interest, then you would just funnel them to this very same mechanism. Yeah, and then they just complete what's appropriate for them, and see what comes out of that. So we can talk later about how you want to let us know the answers to some of these questions, but I know you'll get them to us. Thank you for.
So one final clarifying question to Tammy, actually. We talking steak of my choice, restaurant of my choice?
We'll pick a nice neutral. I'll draw out a hat.
They can't have garlic.
Okay.
No garlic.
All right, I think earlier I said we had 3 reports, we actually have 4, pardon me. The last report this evening is about the 2017-18 Professional Learning Plan, again for information only. Dr. Beth Brockman, the Assistant Superintendent for Employee Services, will present the 2017-18 Professional Learning Plan. Dr. Brockman.
Well, I'm going to bless you this evening, not with myself presenting, but someone who's much more gifted and knowledgeable about the work to date and the work moving forward, Miss Ashley Helms and her team.
Good evening. Thank you, President Mender, Dr. Bingley, and board and cabinet members for this opportunity to share with you the work that we're doing in professional learning across Plano ISD. Before we jump into our presentation, I would like to introduce my 2 new team members. So I'll have them stand. I have Edna Fithian is our new coordinator for professional learning, and she joined us this year from Highland Park. And Marcus Miller is our new coordinator for employee learning, and he joined us from Arlington ISD. So we were very excited to have them here, and they have just hit the ground running and are already doing some phenomenal work. So we're excited to have them on our team. So we are going to kind of look at our professional learning plan. Last year, Dr. Gutierrez presented to you kind of the scope of work that my new, as Dr. Bingley called us, our tiny but mighty department was going to put together over the course of a year. And so that includes a professional learning plan. However, that is still in process. And so we'll kind of talk about where we are in the process of developing our professional learning plan, as well as some of the efforts that have taken place over the last year to fulfill some of those things that we kind of told you we were planning on doing last year. So our department has adopted these 3 guiding principles that we use to kind of consider professional learning. And the 3 are, we want everything that we do in professional learning to be intentional, reflective, and empowered. When teachers are with us for any reason, we always want them to feel like their time is well spent, that it's intentional, that it connects to a goal, that it connects to something that is data informed and student focused. And so that is, that intentional piece is really important if we're gonna pull teachers from the classroom, if we're gonna have them spend their own time after school, if we're gonna do job embedded learning, whatever we're gonna do, we want it to be super intentional. So, and that's not just from our part on as far as planning, but also that they understand as a participant what the intention and what the goal is. Reflective, we do believe that our teachers and educators and our paraprofessional staff as well are reflective practitioners, and we want to give them that opportunity. So in the learning process, we want to give them a lot of opportunity to reflect and refine their practice, and then empowered. Hopefully every time that anyone spends any time with us learning, they feel like they have something that they can do tomorrow, something that is tangible, something that they can go back and use with students, or that will really and truly impact their practice in their classroom or on their campus. So those are our 3 guiding principles as we think about professional learning. As we move forward, I hope that you see those reflected in the work that we do. So last year, what we presented was a plan to make a plan. And so what we did is we have created this professional learning commission, and we call it that because when we talked about that initially, we said, well, this I think will probably be a year 2 thing that we put together as a group of people that really work on our plan. And the message from the board was, we cannot wait for this, we need to move. And so it was really a group of people that is commissioned by the board to really focus on professional learning. So it is our professional learning commission. And our priorities for our commission work is adopted standards. So as you read through board policy about what professional learning is required, it says that professional learning will be based on standards, and that's all. It does not have a set of standards, so that was one of our first things that we began to look at, is what standards would we adopt as a commission, and I'll look at that in just a second. We also needed to really redefine professional learning. What does that mean for Plano ISD? We want to have mission and a vision statement about where are we going with professional learning here. And then the third thing that we really focus on is coherent systems. How are we going to make sure that each one of our educators has a system of professional learning. I think that systems are extremely important. We always say that you don't want any kid to luck out, right? That's why we have systems. That's why we have a guaranteed and viable curriculum, is so that a kid never lucks out and gets a teacher that's well trained, or lucks out and gets a teacher that knows how to do something or provides the education that they need. But we also feel like that's really important for our educators, that no one lucks out and gets good professional learning, that there are systems in place for them to access the information and support that they need as well. So those systems across our district are also very important for our teachers, just like we believe that they are for our students. So I just threw in some pictures of our commission. We have about between 45 and 50 if we have some members that come when they can. But that is a really good cross-section of our district. We have coordinators, directors, executive directors. We have the largest number we have is teachers. So we have about 19 teachers or instructional specialists that are on campuses that are a part of our committee. We have principals and assistant principals, because everybody has a different view of what is needed as far as professional learning. So we've had a really great time kind of getting to know one another, coming together and making our norms and focusing in on this really important work. So the standards of professional learning, the ones that we have really looked at, Learning Forward, which I like to call the artist formerly known as the National Staff Development Council. So they are the national organization that really represents professional learning across the United States and globally. They petition Congress and work with our legislators to make sure that we have access to good professional learning. They fight for Title II. They make sure that we have funds and access as far as our national picture looks. And they do have a set of professional learning standards. Our commission has reviewed those standards. We looked at them in depth to see if, just because they're nationally adopted standards, we want to make sure that they are Plano ISD ready standards as well. And so we took the time to see if those are what we really felt were applicable for us and would help guide our work. And they were agreed upon by our commission, and so that will be something that will come to you at some point during this school year, is a place for you to adopt those as part of what we do in our commission work as part of our plan. We also, as a commission, have redefined professional learning for Plano ISD, and this is the definition that we have very, very collaboratively over the course of several meetings and lots of like digital collaboration and face-to-face collaboration come up with. So I really love it. So professional learning is a reflective and continuous growth process where learning extends into practice, positively impacting student success. And so that's the definition here of professional learning. And what we love about that is that it does not just mean for teachers. It does not just mean for principals or APs or instructional side. That definition can be used across our organization. So you can talk to a food nutrition worker, you can talk to someone who works in transportation, and professional learning is a reflective and continuous growth process where learning extends into their practice and impacts students. And that's what we wanted to focus on, was something that was not just okay for teachers, but was really extended throughout our organization. As far as our vision statement goes, this is the vision of professional learning, is that Plano ISD will cultivate a culture that empowers and supports all staff through collaborative, innovative, and reflective learning. So those were our big key terms that came up over and over and over again in our commission, is that we really wanted a culture of learning, not just a system, but the system supports the culture and vice versa. So that's our new vision statement for professional learning. And then the PL Commission, we had a charge, and then we worked on what were our hopes that we would get out of this work. We talked a lot about our goals, and through those conversations, we kind of were able to narrow down that this is our mission. So like throughout the course of the work that we're doing together, and each of our commission members made an 18-month commitment. So they were on our commission starting last January, and they will be through the end of this school year, where we will have a product as far as a coherent professional learning plan with some guidelines and some other support documents. But this is what we hope to achieve, which is through reflection and revision, we will intentionally create a learning culture by designing systems that equip and empower all employees to provide each student with an excellent education. So we're able to kind of fold in our district mission into our commission mission. It's a lot of missions in one sentence. So that leads us to, throughout this work, and we put forward a level 2 budget request last year for some specific learning for our commission members. And so this is how we are spending the money that you allotted for the learning for this group. And so we are sending a large number of our members. So we've got I think 5 going to Texas AACD. We have 4 going to INACOL, which is a very specific conference about blended and online learning. And the members that are going, that also will impact their work that they do on their campus, because they do those kind of jobs. So that works out really well. So it's double purpose learning. School Reform Initiative is a group that specializes in protocols and how you use those to move work forward. We use a lot of protocols in professional learning, and then also in small groups and large groups to facilitate work that we do. And then also learning forward, and I think we've got 8 going to the School Reform Initiative Conference, and then we have 7 that will be attending the Learning Forward National Conference, and they will be focusing on areas specific to the work that connects to the work group that they are on with the commission. So that is our commission work. That's kind of where we are right now. So we also are bringing in a consultant group that will be training those that are not going out on a trip. We have someone coming in to talk about the standards and practice and tips, tools, and techniques for effective professional learning. So everyone on the commission has an opportunity to learn. So that's our commission work and where we stand right now. We have a lot of work to do throughout the year, but we have taken an assessment that has given us a really clear picture of where we need to start work. It also has a lot of resources built into that we will be able to measure throughout our progress throughout the year. So that's kind of where we start. So I'll pause and see if there's any questions about commission, because we move on from there.
Well, I have a quick question. You know, we're asking for an emphasis on dual credit, and I know that we'll be partnering with the local community college or Collin College. Is there anything in this learning, these conferences, that can help bring back some experiences for that dual credit professional learning for that?
So the specific focus of the conferences that we're going to, Texas ASCD does have some curriculum connections, so there may be something in that might connect. INACOL really is about blended and online learning, so we're looking at that from a couple of different purposes. So the members of our commission that are going to that, the blended or online learning that they do on their campuses, like one is a teacher at Gwen, or the assistant principal at Gwen, and one is a teacher at Byrd, and so they do a lot of that blended work. And then Matt Fry is joining us as well at that conference, so that we have that instructional technology lens. So as far as informing the work of dual credit, I'm not sure. I mean, I would have to look at the conference programs to see if there's anything that specifically connects, but we can definitely look.
Okay. Thank you.
So with that being said, so that's kind of where our plan is kind of headed, and then we just wanted to showcase some of the work that we have been doing. I think, yeah, I said that. So doing as a department, because we do appreciate you kind of, the board, establishing this as a department and not just a person as it was before we got here, and then also adding another staff member to our team this year, which is really beneficial. So you know, by its nature, our department is one of support, and so last year we really spent the majority of the year doing an extended needs assessment, trying to see what we could do to fill in some gaps of what we can provide, how we can help, how we can support other departments. And so last year, I think the graphic that you saw was us at the hub and all of the other things around, but there was no, like, what we were doing with everyone around us, because we were very new. I think the board presentation last year was September 20th. So we had been here, like, I think a total of 6 weeks. So as you look at this, and everything is not listed here. However, there's a whole lot of collaboration that has happened over the course of the last year as we've been able to support academic services in a variety of ways, campus services. We're working with them on several projects. We worked with them last year on some flex learning for principals and some other initiatives with principals and assistant principals. We have with our technology team, we work through flex learning. We use them as a constant collaborator as we run ideas by them. Our business and operations, we have support for non-instructional employees as well. So we've got a couple of different things going there. Marcus supports fans. He supports really everybody on that side. Transportation, I think last week alone, he had he facilitated learning with transportation, fans, and facilities. So he's working with a lot of their leadership teams, but then also that will extend beyond that as well. Campus collaborations, we've worked on some campus flex catalogs, so campuses will call us out. Their CIP aligned learning, so as they're looking at their campus improvement plan or their SBIC, how can we support that, or how can we develop learning that will support the goals and the things that they're seeing on their campus. Some teacher and team coaching, and then just specific book studies that we've been able to create for principals, and then they can turn those around for their staff. So just with all the different departments, we're really able to support and then find where else we can plug in, and that's kind of where some of our other slides come in. So one of the big things that we found as far as our year-long needs assessment is that a lot of our teachers didn't know what was going on with professional learning. So we are really trying to make that really more transparent as we moved through this last year. And Carla's team and Dan's team with the implementation of the new website has been hugely helpful in that venture for us. So we really did work on our updated website, and we do email and newsletters as well. So our website, which is great because you can go to that, you can access it several different ways, but easiest way is it has a shortcut, so you can actually go to pisd.edu/professional learning, and it takes you right there. And so all the information for professional learning is not just on the inside page or something that you have to kind of search for, it's just right there at fingertips. So all of our learning, the information about flex learning, about opportunities that are coming up, how to access things in my learning plan, which is our PD management system, all of those are just at a button. They're right there for teachers all the time. So and every communication that we send to teachers says, check it out on the website. It's all right there. So it's just about getting everyone trained to get into that spot. So both of their teams were super helpful in us getting that up and rolling last spring. So that's been up since last spring. And then we do send out, I'm going to say occasional newsletters, and we do have a group that we can send to all teachers, and so we send out our hashtag PISD Learns newsletter, and so that kind of just either highlights some things that that would help them focus on their goal, or support them in some way, shape, or form as far as their professional learning. So we put links in there to different activities that we have, and so all of that goes out to teachers on a semi-regular basis right now. So we're looking at what we need to do to collaborate to get a professional learning newsletter that might go out on a more regular basis with just more like, this is what's here, this is what you can see in that we're doing across our district. One thing we did want to just check in with you about is our culturally proficient relationships training, and that is what we used to call cultural competency. So we have moved that a little bit in a little bit different direction. So going back to one of our principles is that we really want all of our learning to be intentional. So when I got here last year and we started looking at this training, one of the things that we did is we anchored it on our first operational belief, which is we turned it into a learning target. So instead of we do this already, the learning target was I can build meaningful and positive relationships with all stakeholders that are anchored in respect, compassion, and trust, and are fueled by the mission of student success. And so we had a team that worked together last year to put this learning together, and this was something that was done in the fall. at all of our campuses. Our principals turned this around for them. So we did the training in full with our principals, and then we did a train the trainer type session with them about how to turn this around, and they have done it with their campuses. We also, my team facilitated this for 400 fans, employees at one time. That was a lot of fun. We've done it with transportation, with facilities, we've our central office teams, and so there's still a few groups that are like just we have some stragglers that we're still like, you know, have some learning, but by January 1st, I think everybody in our district will have this learning completely done. So it is something that we can say with this training we've all done, and it really does address, like, so this is our learning target, but the topic that we address is implicit bias and how implicit bias can interrupt this goal of building meaningful and positive relationships with all stakeholders.
So Ashley, I'll give you a piece of feedback. I went to an open house in one of our high schools, and I was waiting outside in the hallway while the teacher was talking to another parent. You may recall that earlier this year we started a new guidelines about, I'm relating to your culturally proficient. And if you remember, we had this non-Christian holidays that we're going to observe. There's a new guidelines that went there, and so I'm standing out in the hallway waiting for my turn to speak to a teacher about my daughter, and I hear the teacher speaking to another parent saying, you know, I just got this guideline. I have no idea what's it. I think it's discriminatory and so on. And little did they know that I was standing right outside, and when I came in, it was my turn. He almost fainted, but I sat with him to explain to him what the background is, and at the end, he said, you know what, this is the first time anybody explained it to me. So I think that being culturally proficient is one thing, but explaining to them why. What is the source of why are we doing certain things that we do? And it's not, that's just one example. It's something to keep in mind.
And I appreciate that. We did address lots of different aspects to the implicit bias conversation, but we did not specifically include information about the holidays. So
No, I'm using this as an example he got the guidelines, he just didn't understand why. What's behind it?
Good feedback that we can think about as we move forward.
Ashley, was this material created exclusively by PISD?
Yes. Well, in collaboration with Capital One. So Capital One has in our Teach the Teacher grant, we were able to, there were some things that I was able to say, I really don't want money. I really would rather have collaboration, like what we need, and they had a lot of copyrighted materials that they actually just let us have. They really offered some really great support. We were able to take a team to Capital One, and they, after we had kind of a halfway point, and they provided us with a team that gave us feedback from their diversity division, and so kind of looking into that. So they were very supportive, but yes, so we used some of those pieces that they provided us, but we made some educational tweaks to them, and but yeah, this is just created for just PISD. And we bought the copyright to the things that we use, and we have 15,000 licenses for those, so we can continue to do this training beyond just this year. So another area that we support is in T-Test, which is our new evaluation system. And so just a few things that we'll talk about is we have our T-Test playlist, we have Google Classroom, and then differentiated orientations for T-Test support for teachers. So our professional learning playlist, the concept behind this is part of what our principals do with the teacher evaluation system is that they have a post-conference. In their post-conference, one of the things that is mapped out is they talk to teachers about a glow and a grow, or an area of refinement and an area for reinforcement. In their area of refinement, or what we can work on, there is an aspect that they need to provide some professional learning for them in that conversation, or here's something that you could read, or here's something that you could go to. And it's very time consuming for principals because this is a new expectation since PDOS did not have this expectation or anywhere close to it, and that's just one of the additional expectations. So we created these professional learning playlists, and what they are is they connect to different aspects of the T-test rubric to where when principals go into those conversations, they don't have to just try to find something on their own. They can see what the area of refinement is and then be able to have some resources right there, and they can share those with teachers as they see fit. So those are really just a resource for principals as they move through their post-conferences. And then we add them as principals ask for them. So all of our administrators have been invited to join a T-test Google Classroom. So just like teachers use them, we have one for our principals. It houses everything that we send out about T-test. So from HR or professional learning or from the state, we upload all of those things as well. They can also ask questions of each other. They share their own resources, but it's a way for us to keep everything in one place and to keep that dialogue open to where we're still learning about this process to where we can support our teachers efficiently. And then this year we had the new opportunity that we would have some of our teachers that were trained in T-test and some of them that were not. And it's not an option. You have to be trained in T-test. But for our new to PISD teachers, what we didn't want to do is have all of our teachers have to sit through something that they didn't need. So we had a day zero, and that was only for first year teachers. And it was the way that we were able to really allow them to have this very differentiated experience, and it was a blast. We had so much fun. So not only did we do the T-test support there, we also embedded some social emotional support for them. We created, your to-do list, things that you want you to be your legacy. We talked about their to-don't list, the things that they promise they will never do. And then we also talked about their to-done list or some celebrations and talked about how important it is to celebrate the good things that are happening. And we created a to-done list with, right in the very center of it, a sticker that says hired as a first year teacher at Plano ISD, because that is a celebration, and we want them to remember that we know that they are special and we're glad that they're part of our family. And so the pictures that you see actually came from, we did a goose chase, which is an online scavenger hunt where they got like 1,000 points if they got a picture with Dr. Bingley, and he was very accommodating. So we had a lot of pictures. They went over operational beliefs.
I'm not generally that popular.
So yeah, I had to explain that for sure. So, but we had a really great day. We had principals that came out and helped us train. It was really a joint effort between campuses and human resources and professional learning, and everybody just really working together to welcome our new people and say that we're really glad that you chose to be a first year teacher in Plano ISD. And so that's one way that we're able to differentiate the orientation. The second way that we're able to differentiate the orientation is if you're an experienced teacher but you haven't been T-test trained, we were able to collaborate with about 15 area districts to create a T-test online course. There were a lot of companies this year that were selling a T-test online course for about $50 a seat. And so as we started talking about that, that didn't feel like a great use of our resources. So what we did is we worked together with about 15 other districts in the Metroplex. We came together and we planned this course together, kind of vetted the content. We had some other people check it out as an end user before we published it for our teachers. But now the same course is being used in multiple platforms across the Metroplex by Richardson ISD, McKinney ISD, Allen. We're using it. I think Southlake is using it. Grapevine Colleyville has it in the wings for when they need it, when they have some teachers that are ready for it. So it really has freed up our HR and professional learning department to where we can do other things during the school year instead of just training new people or providing those one-time trainings. So that's how we're using this course. We also have added a lot of flexible professional learning this year. The big things are goal groups, which we talked to you a lot last year about. So as teachers had kind of done their goals, they had the opportunity to join these goal groups. We did our prototype goal groups last year, and through that we were able to kind of get some feedback from them and then relaunch them. So we've made some tweaks to those goal groups, and through that what we really want is them to be really collaborative. So we kind of want them to ping pong back and forth with each other. We don't want it to be just you say something and no one talks back to you. So we've restructured them a little bit, and we have our cycle 1 is now, and then there will be a cycle 2. So there's several opportunities throughout the year for them to participate in these goal groups. So I added some things, and y'all have the presentation, but the feedback from teachers has really been phenomenal about what they really felt like. We had in our feedback form, we had them answer, I used to think and now I know. And so some of those are, I used to think I was alone in my thinking, and now I know that there's others who carry out plans just like me. I used to think that there weren't as many people with like interests. Now that I know I can connect with teachers in the district with amazing ideas. My favorite one is this one. So I used to think that collaboration within our district was not possible unless we were physically together attending the same workshop. Now I think that there are many teachers in our district interested and willing to collaborate online regardless of subject or grade level taught. And so these goal groups, you don't have to, it's not just with your grade level, it's not just with your subject, it's K-12 teachers talking about great instruction and what they're working on, and they really are supporting each other in this online platform. We added an online professional learning catalog that has content that's developed by a couple of different vendors that integrates with my learning plan. We've been able to put this learning out there for our teachers as well, so it is flexible and just in time. It is ready to go at a moment's notice when they are ready. So they just log in, they get started, and credit is awarded. So we have access to more than what we have available for teachers at this point, because we're constantly vetting those courses and then adding more, but we're not putting them out there till we look at them, make sure all the content looks good. So we also have in there some special education courses, some ESL, but then also just general teaching strategies. So there's really a little bit of everything for everyone. It's really flexible, so you can do your PD and your PJs. Then we've got some other asynchronous opportunities. We've worked with other departments to be able to put on their webinars, other learning that they've created. So we don't just have other vendors creating things. As our district personnel create learning, we're able to sync that up and publish it as well. This is my favorite new thing, which is in collaboration with Library and Media Services, we were able to purchase an ASCD ebook library with 35 ebooks that all of our employees can access at the same time. So we can all read the same book at the same time without our teachers needing to purchase those books. So there's a variety of books that everybody can read together. And we bought that library. It integrates with our EBSCO and Gale Group online resources that they have through the library. And so we have it's not a yearly subscription. We have those books. We own them. And so that is just a really great resource that we've been able to add so that teachers aren't having to spend their own money on professional resources to support their goal.
Can you add to that library?
Yeah, so we can add it in collections. I'm trying to wheel and deal and make them, like, I don't want to just add their collection. I want us to be able to pick our own books. So that's where I am in the negotiations right now, is that I don't want the library that they said. It has a lot of stuff that says Common Core, and I said no thank you. So I want for us to be able to pick books that we feel like support what we're doing in our district to be able to move forward. And so there's just some of the titles you can see there. It just looks like a shelf, but it actually reads them to them as well, so it accommodates for different needs. Our externship program, we have 11 externs that were placed in various businesses across our city, and they had a really great experience. And today we actually were able to share that experience with our consortium friends as well as some Capital One employees about how they are using those experiences to turn them around in the classroom. So we're excited. We had a pilot or pioneer group this last year, but we are hoping to expand that program as we move into the next year. So that's where they all were. So they had a really fun summer. They were paid $35 an hour to work over the summer, and now they are working on kind of collecting their learning corporately, and they're going to be able to turn that around for professional learning for other teachers in our district. And then employee learning, I know it's late, so we really are working with the other district service departments, and we've kind of touched on that, but to provide learning for everyone. And we're really excited excited about the direction that that's going. Next month, we start our non-instructional collaborative experience, or our NICE meetings, which will focus on leadership development for the non-instructional side of the house. And then there's just some things that we do. So we have an office manager update, and then there's just some of the pictures of learning that we've facilitated over the course of the last year. So things that are coming, capacity cohorts. So we are building capacity cohorts to build teachers' capacity. The two that we are offering this year are, one is about leading adult learning, so teachers who are often tapped to do professional learning on their campus, for them to build their capacity in those areas. And then also a player coach is what we're calling it, but so teachers who are phenomenal at classroom management but could also mentor someone else in classroom management. We're going to grow their capacity at making their practice visible and being able to see what they're actually doing. And then through that, we'll also host some learning labs where they will walk with the teachers that they are mentoring to see some really great instruction. And then we're continuing to work on our system support, our PD management system, and kind of just figuring out how to make everything flow a little smoothly, and doing, retrofitting some things that we need to retrofit, and fixing things that we need to fix, and supporting where we can. So that's what we have going.
So, when we had to deal with, or dealt with teacher salaries, and where do we want to place ourselves, and we wanted to be in the top 25%, so that we attract the best teacher talent to our district. The distance between the top 25% and the bottom 25% was $1,000 or 2%. That's not the reason we can attract the best teachers. In my opinion, the two reasons why we can attract the best teachers: the culture and professional development. So I know I don't need to convince you, but this is great. What you're doing here is great. It's really hope that we're going to get all the results that we should. So thank you.
You guys have come so far in 1 year, and we really appreciate, Dr. Bingley, you bringing this idea of incorporating professional learning into our organization in such an important way.
Awesome job.
Thank you.
Come a long way in 1 year is worth saying again.
Okay, do we have any discussion regarding topics for future work sessions?
So mine.
All right, hearing none, this meeting is adjourned.